we are live now. Supposedly. So can y'all see me? Hey there, everybody. Awesome. All right. Hey, well, yeah. Oh, looks like I have a spoiler up, so don't look too far ahead. Yeah. All right. Yeah. It looks like we have a pretty high latency, so yeah. Apologies for that. Yeah. All right. But yeah. So I guess whew. Yeah, it's good to be here. Good to be here. Yeah, so thank you all for showing up. Yeah, and let me think. Yeah. So yeah, I guess before we get started, anyone got any questions? But yeah, it looks like things are going pretty smoothly. Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess it looks like everyone's showing up. So thank y'all. Let's see. Okay, it looks like I'm gonna just get everything set up. Yeah, okay. But yeah, no, so I guess my name's CJ. To uh, y'all who don't know that. um, but yeah, so let me turn off the volume so you don't get any feedback. All right. Yeah. All right. So yeah. So my name's CJ. I've created over 100 games, and yeah, it's been it's been great. I've been able to make I guess what I originally started off as a hobby into a full career, and yeah, I know there are many people here who share the same passion as me for that. I think yeah, so I think that is certainly something which I'm very excited for. The Let me think. But yeah, that. So yeah, 12 years, 100 games, 200 million plays. Yeah. Yes, I am the guy from that one documentary. That, in case y'all wonder, like, why do I recognize that guy? Well, they came here and filmed a documentary about me, and that was surreal, but certainly one of the best experiences of my life. It was flattering to see so many people, really just engage with the story, and I was happy to be able to share that aspect of my life with people. And yeah, so also someone asked, why is this being done on YouTube instead of Bevy? Last time I did stream on Bevy, there was some issues with the playback. People weren't able to really see the visuals as well. So this just keeps things simpler for me. Yeah, but let me know if y'all want me to go back to Bevy. We can make sure to do that next time. But otherwise, yeah, this is I think this is a good option as well. I think it's actually the one I have the most experience with. But yeah, and speaking of experience, the internships. I spent a few summers, specifically two, in 2017 and 2019 as a Roblox intern. And yeah, I had a great time. I got to meet some of some of the smartest people I've ever known in my life. And yeah, it's just been an overall very positive experience. And I hope to allow y'all some of that positivity as well, just because I know not everyone gets a chance to do an internship, but I I learned a lot of things during it, and I'm hoping to be able to share that. Beyond that, the college. I actually went to college as a game design major for about 2 years. Transferring from Purdue, where I spent another 2 years. Don't worry, I got a degree. It wasn't technically in game design. I got a minor in that, but yeah, I took a lot of game design classes, and I talked to a lot of very brilliant people. And yeah, it's just this is going to be a speed run of some of the stuff I learned. And I also have read a lot of books on these things because I just really do. I really do. What's it called? I really do enjoy going deep into like player motivation and all the things that go on behind the scenes when you play a game, because I think that really allows for the best overall understanding of something. Like, you don't want to just understand what a game is on face value. You want to understand the underlying workings of it. And so, in my opinion, this is the best way to do that. And yeah, so let's actually get to what systems are, because yeah, you don't want to just watch me talk for about myself. Well, you're gonna be watching me talk for an hour. Apologies, I can't avoid that. But actual systems, well, that's what I'm here to learn. I've learned a lot about something called systemic gameplay. And to those who aren't aware of what it is, don't worry, that's what the slide after this one is. But this is sort of an overview of what we'll be talking about when we're talking about what systemic gameplay is, what are the advantages of it, how to design systemic gameplay, and then, of course, bringing that design to reality. So yeah, no, there are a lot of very excellent resources out there for systemic gameplay. And yeah, I think we'll be going over a few of them, as well as, of course, the chapter outline that I just discussed. And yeah, so let's get into it. I'm sorry if I'm a bit frazzled. My brain's just still adjusting. But yeah, understanding systemic gameplay. Basically, why are the chess devs so slow to update? It's been centuries since the last patch. We can probably best appreciate systemic gameplay through a game like chess, because chess doesn't have too many content updates. There aren't maps. There aren't really any alternate ways to play. In fact, a chess game is fully understandable just by looking at a single board. You see every piece. You know every move. You can consider every possibility. It has a very limited play space, and because of that, its success is very reliant on the systems at play. The various mechanics and movements of the pieces, the rules that the entire game plays by, such as if a piece coexists on the square of another piece, it takes that piece. You can't take the king, and also obviously check, where like if something's threatening the king, they have to move. Stuff like pieces not being able to jump over each other unless they're a knight. All these rules, they work together to create infinite potential play experiences. And that's why you can play a game like chess over and over again without really needing new content, without needing a DLC. Like, all of those things can truly exist as an option, like as something you can add on top. Like, I know people have made modifications of chess. I know there are people who have added pieces. So it's not saying that like updating a systemic game is bad, but rather it's unnecessary. You can have a game like chess just succeed indefinitely. And yeah, I still enjoy it. I've played many games of it in my life, and I think I think that we could learn a lot from those type of games. And they exist in Roblox as well. So let's actually take a moment to look at a systemic Roblox game. Let's see. The example I always go to as just the starter, like, this is a great systems game, definitely watch this. Definitely play this game. The one I always go to is Natural Disaster Survival. because to me it's a very elegant game. It has a few rules, but despite that, it has so many potential emergent play value. And every addition to the game, through content such as a new disaster, a new map, whatever, uh, adds a whole nother layer, which I think allows it to be a game which has been successful for so long. It has been around for 9 years, and while they have added new maps and I think the occasional new disaster, it has remained relatively unchanged. A person playing 2012 Natural Disaster Survival is not going to have a very different experience than the person who's watching it now. It's a game which probably didn't take too long to make. The underlying coding of the disasters, you probably finish one disaster every few hours. You could probably create most of the maps within a day per map. And so, like, you could recreate the entire game in probably 2 to 3 weeks. But despite that, despite only taking 2 or 3 weeks to make, it's been around for 9 years. That's insane. Think of that for a moment. Imagine if in 3 weeks worth of work you could get 9 years worth of income. Like that is something which makes systemic gameplay quite compelling. But I don't want to go too deep into that because I know there will be a whole section up ahead about the competitive advantages of systemic gameplay. For now, let's just talk about what you see. Someone just pointed out nostalgia can affect its player count. I think that might. I guess I think that there's certainly people who enjoy it because of nostalgia, but I'd say that the majority of people on Roblox who were around in 2012, they aren't around anymore. The average player is now much younger, and just having played it myself in creating this presentation, I know that it's a game that is still fun to new generations, and I think that could probably be there are probably changes it could make to further embrace new players, but by and large, I do think it is due to the merits of the game. And so let's talk about the actual game itself. And for those who haven't played before, Natural Disaster Survival is it's a fairly simple concept. There's a map. There is a disaster. Sometimes there are multiple disasters, but for the sake of easy math, we're not going to be doing the multi-disaster stuff or VIP stuff. And and so with this combination, you have 16 maps and 11 disasters, and that gives you about 176 round configurations. And this is the first big advantage of systemic gameplay. When you can mix and match different mechanics together, you create essentially a matrix of options. 16 times 11 in this case, which is 176. And this means that instead of having to make 176 unique rounds, you only have to make, in this case, 11 disasters and 16 maps. And so you get a lot more gameplay out of your specific efforts. Same thing with chess. Like, if you look at a chessboard, you could probably make it out of Legos and still have a compelling chess game. In fact, I know there was a few Lego chess sets. And yeah, it's definitely something which I think gets overlooked. How much these kind of creating mechanics that build off each other can truly help a game and help a developer, because unlike a AAA studio, which can invest hundreds of millions of dollars into creating as many assets and cutscenes as they want, you're an indie developer. You don't have that big a budget. You have to be smart with how you spend your time, or if you're hiring other people, your money. And so systemic gameplay allows you to get a lot more game for a lot less time. And it doesn't end there. We're about to get into some crazy stuff. The 176. Do you think there's only 176 game play session experiences in Natural Disaster Survival? No, it's gonna get a lot crazier. Let's introduce our first of many flowcharts. The software I use is called Miro. I recommend it. There's a free version, but there is also a paid version which I use, which unlocks a few extra features. But from what I remember, you can create the first 3 maps for free, and you can add as much as you want to them. So this is, I'm not sure if there's a good name for it, but it's a flowchart describing the relationships between the map, player, disaster, and lobby, and how they all impact each other, how they all can cause change. If you look at the disaster, you'll see it interacts with other mechanics. It interacts with the map by causing debris, and it interacts with the player by directly threatening them. The map, it provides shelters, which tempt the player to make decisions. If you look under the goals area, one of the player goals is to increase security, and yeah, so that will lead the player to be tempted by certain shelters provided by the map, and so you have this spider web of different mechanics, all interact with each other, all pushing against each other, all changing the context of the game. And you can imagine how how a player put in this, how changing a single thing will cause a cascading effect and just keep changing stuff. And because it loops in on itself, the first change, the first state, whatever it may be, does inevitably set off events which change the following experiences. And so, almost like dominoes, you knock over the first one, and next thing you know, everything's falling over. And this is systemic gameplay at its core. It's seeing how these mechanics interact with each other and how they influence each other. And while I don't necessarily think you need to have it as complicated as this one, I do believe that you should write this as you see fit. Like, there's no one standard for a flowchart describing systems. Like, there are some general rules of thumb. Like, people say, oh, you should use a triangle for certain action events. And, like, maybe, yeah. I just write it as I find most natural to me. And the way you write it may be different. So long as your team understands what you're talking about, I think that's fine. So don't worry, don't take notes on like, oh, you have to label it in an Arial bold 13 font or something. Like, no, you just write it as it makes sense. Just understand that different mechanics influence each other and push the player to do different things. And so systemic game. Arsenal is an excellent example of systemic gameplay. Yeah, so thank you for pointing that out in the chat. There's so many amazing systemic games on Roblox. In fact, I'd argue that Roblox is mostly systemic gameplay. At its core, a game mechanic is inherently a system. If you have a game without any game mechanics, you have a movie. You have to be able to interact with the game, and as you interact with the game, you change it, and you change your behavior. And so what I'm really advocating for is designing gameplay which maximizes that, which has mechanics that build off each other in ways which allow you as a developer to create games that are compelling, that are ideally easy to learn, but also quick to make. Tetris is an excellent, great example of a game with some truly good underlying rules that can create some fun gameplay throughout its lifetime. I know it was. I think I even originally had Tetris 99 on one of the slides at some point, but I'm not sure if it's there anymore. But yeah, the underlying thing. If I want you to understand one thing, it's that game mechanics that build off each other, that interact and influence each other. That is what a system is. It is when two rules essentially. Because that is what a mechanic is in most instances. It's a rule. It's like, think about it. A fighting mechanic is the rule that if player click, person 5 feet in front of them minus 10 health. Like, that's what a mechanic is. It's a very simple like if statement. It's a condition that is met and takes certain inputs. And by having the output of your mechanics be the inputs of other mechanics, and then having those inputs being and then having those new mechanics output to the original mechanic, you can get this loop, this systemic gameplay, this system of special relationships between mechanics that can create some very dynamic gameplay. And yeah, it can be a bit difficult to think about, but don't worry, we'll be discussing that. We'll be going over different ways to consider systems when designing them and all that fun stuff. And so yeah, let's get back to the math, because I know that's what y'all like, math, right? Right? School's over. Let's talk more about math. So, taking the previous chart and simplifying it, we can find that with around 2 actions, the 2 actions for a player being, as you remember, stay and move, and as well as 2 outcomes such as successfully pulling off a stay, like staying there and I guess not getting flung out, or staying there and getting flung out, as well as, of course, fleeing and escaping, and fleeing and not escaping. You end up getting 4 action states, so 4 potential action outcomes. With that come a map. Most maps, there are different shelter states per each. Yeah, calculus is great. Y'all should definitely take it if you get a chance, especially if you want to be a game dev. It's very helpful, especially for neural networks, which I'm particularly interested in. I'm talking for too long. All right, but yeah. Ever just like, ever just get weirded out by, like, I don't know, some aspect that's totally normal? Like, just remember, like, wow, my lips just feel weird. They're so, it's like, it's so weird how you can move them like that. It's like, I'll find any reason to get off task. See, just stop. Okay, so back with the shelter states. If you have each map and then break it down into 3 different groups, you think, Lolly, you just someone asked, how complex do you think flowcharts can get, and how complex do you think is too complex? So, I think it's best to consider this like a book. Tell me, are the Game of Thrones books too complex, too long, too many subplots? Some people will say yes, some people will say no. Now, are the Arthur books, that we're talking like the Aardvark, are they too complex, or are they too simple? Most people would say they're probably too simple, and they probably don't read them too much. Though I tell you, the show holds up. Yeah, the books themselves aren't really. There's not really a too complex or too non-complex book. There is a book which will work with a certain audience. So the question is, who is your audience? If you've made a flowchart and you don't understand what you're looking at, then that is too complex. If the people you're trying to explain it to don't get it, then arguably it is too complex. And if y'all are too confused by this, then in a sense I have failed to make a successful systemic flowchart. But giving a presentation is a little bit more difficult, because obviously talking to a team, you can talk them through parts of it, you know them better, and they likely know the context of the game, as well as probably have a little bit more knowledge about systems if they're working with you. Or I guess me. So just build it to your audience. Try to get as much in there as you feel comfortable with, but obviously go with the most important stuff first, so that if you have to stop because it's getting too complicated, then that Arthur theme song was catchy. Okay, but yeah, so flowcharts, as simple or as complex as you like, they're really just almost a sketch on paper, just to convey meaning, convey change, and in reality, the best way to probably describe a system to someone is to build a system, because seeing it in motion is a lot easier. Like if you see almost like who here has played Factorio? Factorio is all about systems, and you can see things moving from A to B, and how all the different resources flow to different parts of the map, and then remerge and all that stuff. Seeing a system in action can make it much more easy to understand. So in a sense, flowcharts and diagrams like this are, and so all these are abstracts that are really just meant to be an easier way to describe a system to someone without having to code it. Because, yeah, they take a little bit of time to code. I wouldn't say necessarily more than a linear game, but they do take time. You can't just pop open Studio and then code for 2 days every time you want to explain something to someone. And also someone's pointed out different presentation ideas. Advertising is, I think, one which I do definitely want to work with, because especially in the release. Actually, I think I'll go over advertising a bit at the end of this presentation because we'll be talking about how to release and test a game, and I'll talk to you a little bit about my own experiences trying to advertise and market a game from the ground up. Also, someone else has asked. Okay, so I need to stop. I need to stop going off topic. If y'all are asking a question which is directly related to the slide, I will probably answer it. But if it's a more general question, we have a Q&A at the end. So either pop back in when we get to that, or stick around because I promise I will answer those questions. But yeah, so back to this. We have the map broken up into about 3 different shelters. Like the one I can think of off the top of my head is that one park, the park with the big arch. There are people who are like standing on top of the arch. There are people who are like hiding in the shack. There are people who are like hiding under the trees. Like every map will have different numbers of shelters. I'd say arguably maybe that one even has 2, but I know other ones have more. Like the prison there are so many different sheltering options. So in this case, 3 shelters is more of a generalization. I didn't want to go too deep into this because, as you can tell from this one, it's already getting too complex. We have here so we have here 3 shelters per map, and then with each shelter can be in 3 different states of repair. Now this is more of an abstract because there's honestly infinite different ways you could describe a shelter state. Like if a pole's sent through the window of one of the houses, that's not like, does that mean it's destroyed? Does that mean it's partially destroyed? Or does that mean it's perfectly fine? Like, this is certainly a simplification. And I think simplification is very important for working with systems, because if you don't simplify it, well, then you end up with a situation where you're so busy doing like a physics simulation of reality that you don't actually get some of those meaningful insights. High level does require loss of information, and at the end of the day, systems are a high level thing. Direct implementation of it, that's when you get into the low level stuff. And also, I think it's important to say, these diagrams, you don't have to put every single thing into one diagram. Feel free to split them up. Like this one is definitely focusing more on like these are both modeling the same system, but this one has a different focus, which is tracking how many different potential scenarios there are, unique rounds. And so with this, we have obviously 3 threat states, which just to define them outright, I don't think I did earlier. Just totally destroyed, meaning like the shelter is not there anymore, so you can't really consider it. Or if you are considering it, it's like out of some sense of irony or something. Partially destroyed, which is like maybe half of it's gone, but you can still shelter in it a little bit. And then the final one is obviously it's fine. And so the disaster can change the shelter states and... Oh no, wait. I misremembered it. I'm sorry. I've misremembered my own system, so I apologize for that. The threat states are not the same as damage states, which was something I had in an earlier version. And I removed it because I realized it didn't really tell you too much. Like, threat states are the disaster's potential to destroy. If it's about to hit, if it's like directly attacking your shelter, then that threat state is like major threat. Like you are we're under attack. That'll change your desire to flee. That'll do all these different things, and it'll change the experience, because a person who's sitting in a shack that has a tornado right next to it is going to be having a different experience than someone who's in the shack and the tornado's on the other side of the island. Like, the second one is approaching. So you see the disaster is not necessarily directly on top of you, but it's approaching you and it's about to hit you. So like the anticipation, the fear of like, oh no, could be about to go bad. So you are in a position to almost like, it's not chaos yet. It's not like you're not freaking out yet, but you're like, uh-oh, something bad's happening. So that's a different meaningful emotional state. And when you design these systems, you want to consider the emotional states in mind, because you notice that like these systems don't like talk about like the color of the tree or something, because nobody really cares if it's green 43 or green 82. Like you have to figure out what the player is actually experiencing, what they're feeling, because at the end of the day, game experience is a feeling. It is I am enjoying this, I am scared, I am happy, I am excited, I am bored. All of these experiences. Super bomb survival is an excellent example of threat states because obviously if the bomb lands right next to you, you're like, oh boy, I need to move. Whereas if a bomb lands a little bit away from you, But it's one of those like bouncy ones. You're like, okay, maybe I should move. We'll have to keep an eye on that. And then if there are no bombs near you, well, yeah. Well, actually, in that game, there are very few states when there are no bombs near you. But in natural disaster survival, those are the three threat states. And once again, these are all abstractions. There's no one right way to write this. This is just my take on it, on what the player experiences. And you may agree with it, you may feel it's unnecessary. And so with the three threat states toward the shelter, the three threat states also exist towards the player. In fact, I described it being player-centric. But really, if you're considering, like, say, running into, like running to the rocket ship on that one map, and you see a tornado starting to approach it, you will change your mind, like, well, maybe I'm not going to run there. I'm going to run somewhere else. And so the threat states apply to both you and your shelters, because you'll be considering shelters as goals. But yeah, obviously, combine that all together, that can lead to around 108 round states, give or take, based on the map. And if every state is about 30 seconds, because if you think about how long this game takes to change stuff, and not all games are 30-second state changes, and you could view a game changing every second, like a first-person shooter game or Arsenal. Like, your entire world can get flipped upside down in seconds when you turn a corner. I'd say in that game, it's even. I'd argue for Arsenal, you'll find that it's not even a linear thing. Like, there will be times where the states change rapidly within a period of seconds, whereas then there'll be times when it doesn't change for a minute. Well, actually, not in Arsenal's case. It's a very fast-paced game, but having linear spacing between states is really more for just this math problem, for getting a generalization of how many states to expect, rather than any specific reality application. And so we have 700,000 unique rounds, which is a massive number. And it just gets so much bigger. When you combine the 350... when you combine... Oh no, I made a mistake. I messed around with this map for a while, and originally I had two lose states on this one, and instead of 176, it was 352. But so let's do some quick mental math. I think, let's see. Actually, we're gonna do this live. Let's see. Spoilers. 176, I think, was it? It's 176. Yes, and then so let's do that math live. So 176 times 708, 588 times 3, and you get about, let's just simplify it, 374 million. That is a lot. And I think that's the important thing to appreciate here. This is a lot of states. This is more state, like play sessions, sorry, not play states. This is more play sessions than you could ever hope for. This is and when I say 3 rounds per play session, that's an assumption. Assuming the game has around a 12-minute play time and each round's around 4 minutes long, we get around a we even have the, what's it called? Yeah, we will have, I don't remember what I was talking about. All right, refocus. 374 million. A lot. That is a lot. And so yeah, let's also remember that this doesn't even consider the multiplayer aspects. This is assuming you're playing this game alone. If you could play this game alone, you could hypothetically have 374 unique play sessions, where not a single one's the same as the others. Now we'll get into later how that is not actually as big as you may believe, just on the way we perceive reality. But yeah, someone pointed out this is more play sessions than people in the U.S. That is accurate. Yeah, and that is, when you get to these scary big numbers, it can be tempting to just say like, this game will be infinitely replayable. We'll get to that. But for now, just know that as a designer, you can see how this could benefit you, how this could help you out, how all of this can be very, how with a limited budget and only, because remember, you remember this? This is only like what, 3 weeks worth of work? Like that is 3 weeks worth of work, and you've made an entire U.S. population's worth of unique gameplay sessions. That's crazy. And that is why systemic gameplay can truly scale so quickly. That is it. When you imagine having to handcraft all those experiences, imagine trying to make a what's it called? A cutscene, 374 million disaster cutscenes, where like there were 3 disasters in a row. That would cost ridiculous amounts of money. I don't even know. Like if you think of like a movie like Twister or something, where like that had 3, like you can't compete with this by doing it by hand. So systemic gameplay, just it can just outperform stuff in terms of just raw numbers every time. And so yeah, that's systemic gameplay. So hopefully y'all get a better idea of how systemic gameplay works. Let's talk a little bit more about what it means to be an actual to take that and see how it performs in real life. Because 374 million unique play sessions does not necessarily mean millions more income. We have to translate that to reality. So yeah, and now for my favorite slide. Math is cool, but what about violence? Game, fight. Yeah, so we're going to be taking 2 excellent games and making them fight for our education. Yeah, it's don't take this too seriously. It really is just comparing 2 very well-made games. In fact, if you see a game in this, know that I have more respect for that game than my own games. I'd say every game, each of the 2 games in this are very well made, even if they aren't rewarded as equally due to one being systemic and one of them being linear. The point here is not to say this game is bad because it's linear, and I think it's worth touching upon. There will be people out there who, especially like story games. Story games are example which I hear a lot, where someone says, oh, I can't make every game systemic. I can't make every I would want to make a story game because I loved story games growing up and I'm good at making them. Well, at the end of the day, if you're good at making story games and like that's your thing, and you can afford to take the risk, well, yeah, make a story game, make a linear game. Like I don't want y'all to think that you only can make systems games. This is supposed to be a tool for you, and you can know when to use it. Just because cutscenes are more expensive and less efficient does not mean that you can't ever use them. It's a tool. You use it when you like, and I think systems are one which I particularly like using. So yeah, game fight. Let us see our first contender. The Challenger, Roses. It's a linear single-player game with 94% thumbs up and a 1 to 10 favorite-to-play ratio. Now, I didn't realize, I don't do favorite-to-play ratios too often. Oh, well, I'm not someone asked me why I don't have an administrator badge on Roblox. I'm not an admin. I'm not. I'm just a regular dev. I was an intern, and for a little bit I had an intern badge, but as I'm not currently one, I do not have an intern badge. Yeah, but favorite-to-play ratio is very impressive. They don't really display favorite-to-play ratios too often on the site unless you have like a plugin. So just know that not too many games get this good a ratio. And it's been played over a million times, and it's paid access. So it's a very impressive game, and it's probably earned its money back in terms of just making per hours. But we'll be comparing it to a game which y'all have probably heard of. Also, play this game. It's a nice little fun horror game. Yeah, and the defender for systemic games is Murder Mystery 2. This game is it's been around for, I think, since 2015. Well, Murder Mystery has been around since 2015. I don't remember when 2 came out. And Nicholas was really the first one to get so successful on Roblox. I know for a while there was sort of a rivalry between him and Lawless as the Mad Murderer, but really, Nicholas, he won out. And to be fair, Lawless, he's retired. Like he's fine. Don't feel bad for him. He's doing really well. But yeah, Nicholas is an example of a systemic game that really just took a concept that could have infinite gameplay sessions. Because if you think about, let's just quickly, I don't have a spreadsheet set up for like how this for how this really would work out, but let's take a moment to imagine the systems. I'll be doing the math right here. All right, so if there are, I think what, 16 players? Let's assume 16 players in the map, and there's one murderer. Okay, so there's a 1 in 16 chance of. Let's see. So you have a one murderer, and then one. And you have one sheriff. So that means that there are basically 3 ways that you could play the game. So then you have, so that's 16 to the third. You could be innocent, murderer, sheriff, and then, so you could have, let's see, in all these maps, you probably 12 maps, and next thing you know, you already have 50,000 different ways you could play this game. So the exponential math, 12 players. Okay, then in which case, so 12 players to the third, times about, I don't know, 10 maps, 10, I'm trying to remember what numbers I used just a second ago, but 17,000. Point is, just without even considering the fact that like there are other, like every time you play, you will have different players facing you. There's already thousands of play sessions. So this game, I think, passes as a systemic game. As a rule of thumb, just if you can get like a ridiculous amount of play options, potential play configurations, you have a systemic game. Yeah, it's like someone was pointing out that like there are more like potential chessboard configurations than there are atoms in the galaxy or something. Like it gets to pretty big numbers, especially when you have very layered systems. Yeah, but so we have I guess refocusing. It's systemic, it's multiplayer, and because of this, I would say that, okay, quick aside, multiplayer games are a gold mine. Think about a Discord chat. Who here has spent hours in Discord just talking to people? At its very minimum, a multiplayer game should be a Discord chat because people can talk, people can emote, people can meet new people and hang out with friends. Like, a multiplayer game immediately has the compelling level of Discord with maybe less quality GIFs. Like, it'd be nice if you could emote GIFs on Roblox. That'd be pretty cool. Maybe once video frames come out, we can start seeing more of that. I'd love like a Discord style chat in a Roblox game. But yeah, hey, maybe I'll do it. I'm a developer. I can do these things. Timothy has asked multiple times if I work for Roblox. Please hold most questions to the end of the Q&A. But to those wondering. I have worked for Roblox. As to wanting to in the future, I'm not sure. I think I would be open to another accelerator program, but living in San Mateo was quite expensive, and frankly, I don't really see myself going that direction for now, at least. But yeah, no, it was an amazing work experience. So if you have the opportunity, definitely go for it. And yeah, okay. So refocusing on the topic at hand, you have these different. You have these different options for murder mystery. You have a 1 to 400 favorite to play ratio, which is still good. Like I don't want to like people to think that like that this is like this is still a good ratio. It's just Roses has a ridiculous one. Like that is insane. And so anyway, we have multiplayer. Multiplayer is just this amazing thing you can use to make any game more fun. Both these games are still great games. Now let's actually compare them. We're going to have them both update their game in a meaningful way, and one that's reflective of their media, of their systemic or linear nature. We're going to have Roses add a new chapter. We're going to have the more systemic game, Murder Mystery 2. Wait, did I get that right? Okay, yeah, I was thinking about the Mad Murder for a second. Yeah, Murder Mystery 2. We're going to have a multi-murderer mode. And I think they might actually already have this. I haven't played it in a little bit, so maybe like a year or so. And I don't remember it too well, but if they don't have multi-murderer mode, adding one, I'm not even saying it'd be a good idea, but just adding a new system, this is how you could do it. And if you look at the planning, I would like to point out that systems games take a little bit longer to design, because you don't have to plan out just one fun play experience. You have to plan out infinite in a sense, and then make them emergent from various mechanics. And so yeah, it's not really Yeah, like it's going to take longer to plan, but that's okay because, as you can see, there's very little asset creation needed for a systemic game update. You can have new assets, but you don't really need to. Most of the time, we'll go into programming and planning it, typically. Whereas with Roses, you have to create a new map section. You have to create new animations. You still have to program it. I said they both take around the same amount of time to actually program. In terms of marketing it, both of them, we've decided they're both going to market it around the same amount. And yeah, so we have production, and you can see here just adding stuff up. Roses took almost 50% longer. Like that's not nothing. That's if a game takes you 3 months to make. Or I guess let's see what's good. If a game takes you 6 months to make, Roses in that case would take 9 months, and whereas Mario Murder would be the 6 month in this situation. And so, an extra 3 months of development that's a lot, and so it better be worth it. The question is it? So let's move to the next slide and see how it reflects on industry-wide scale. By and large, more systemic games like Overwatch, even I chose Overwatch not because I'd say it's the quintessential systemic game, but because it's an example of a studio with a large amount of funding available being able to make a very compelling game with systems on a smaller budget. And arguably, that small budget might have been sort of necessary because I recall Overwatch was actually pieced together out of the scraps of another project that never really came together. So they might have had a lesser budget, and because of that, they were able to make a compelling experience using less money. Whereas The Last of Us, which is from a big studio, I believe it's Naughty Dog, they have a massive budget, and they were able to create this sort of cinematic, quintessential AAA experience. And so you have these two games, both made by massive studios, but the one which relies more on replaying in the same maps with the same characters, using mechanics to get the most out of those assets, you'll notice it's a lot cheaper. And so producing a systemic game just in terms of like money and time being cheaper is an industry-wide thing. Yeah, but now let's talk about the release, because it doesn't matter if it costs more to make if it earns more profit. Like that's why Hollywood movies keep getting made, where they'll have multi-million-dollar budgets and then they'll get 800 million. It doesn't really matter the ratio of income of cost to return if you can just get a massive return. That's better at the end of the day. And so yeah, release. It's not good. We're assuming right now that both games get 1 million new players, which I think is still pretty nice. I think that's still being fairly it's giving Roses a fighting chance, because as it's a paid access game and linear games are harder to monetize, there was no guarantee that it would get this many players. Yeah, and so also someone just mentioned it again. I need to point out Overwatch, but Last of Us actually earned a lot more on its opening week than Overwatch, but Overwatch just kept on getting played for longer. So we'll touch on that a little bit later. But point is, Overwatch was not as big of a splash. It just stuck around for longer. So that's why systemic games can be so influential. And so we'll get to that in a moment. But point is, I keep getting off task, and I apologize. So if we look at round 2 and the actual release stuff, you have Roses with 1 million players, the Murder Mystery 2. I'm so sorry. Murder Mystery 2 with a new game. They all have the same amount of players, but think about it. Roses is a chapter-based linear game. You can't access that new chapter until you've completed chapters 1 through 3. So, you get diminishing returns with this new update. You don't actually have the same... You even just assuming for a moment that both updates are equally cash cows. They each new interaction with the update is equal to 1 Robux, extra Robux. If you assume that, it's still... it cannot compete in the slightest. Look at that. When you lose one, you get 1/6 of the audience. And also keep in mind with systemic game, you can sort of wait it so that for a few weeks after the new update, you could have it so that it shows up in that game mode more and get more people to interact with it, because odds are people will press play because they saw new update. But Chapter 4 of Roses, while it's still an amazing game, new players won't be able to interact with that new content. And so sure, with the marketing you might be able to bring in new players, but you could have also done that without adding a new thing. Like the actual incentive and reasoning to update gets less and less the farther the linear game goes, because when you have a line, there's literally only one route to get from A to B, and it's just you can't interact with point B until you've gone all the way there. So yeah, it sucks, and you'll see with the release of these two games, the first week or so of just earning money, even though the Mad Murder even though Murder Mystery 2, I've just jinxed myself now. Even though Murder Mystery 2 has is arguably was faster to make, it also, and once again I said before, typically story based like AAA games, they'll have a bigger opening week because like they're easier to market. But all the same, is that extra boost always going to translate over? Not necessarily, because you have to, especially for an update. Like remember, this is a release. If they made a DLC for Last of Us, it would not do better than necessarily an update to Overwatch, because once again, you got that initial drop off. And so let's take a moment to reflect on the revenue. If you look at the revenue, 1.4 billion versus 1.1 billion. That's rough, but also not necessarily end of the world for The Last of Us. Like once again, they earned a profit of $1 billion. They'll be fine. I'm not here to tell you that linear games can't work. They can. I'm just saying, if you're a developer like me, who is working like working to his very best to try to get as much out of this as possible, and like try to get as much out of a single game as possible because you have a limited budget, and you want to have more of a budget for the next game, well, systemic gameplay, it just works. And there's we're gonna have one final matchup, which truly will. Oh, I actually forgot about this part. Yeah. R.I.P. for Telltale Games. Some very talented people. I've met two people who worked at Telltale, and they're some of the most talented people I've ever met. It sucks that it went under. But if you look at that initial drop-off for an update, you can see why. If you make the first chapter of a linear story game, and in their defense, their games weren't even really linear. They were branching narratives, but that's a different discussion. Branching narrative games, in my opinion, are still linear because they aren't really building off mechanics so much. Like typically, branching story games are almost just like one story that reuses assets. Like if you think of almost like a Groundhog Day type situation where you get the same storyline, you have to go through the same moments again and again, and you might be able to change one or two things through a playthrough. But at the end of the day, you're hitting the same beats and you're just reusing assets. So it can be efficient compared to, say, if you have 30 hours worth of cutscene content and you want to spread it out to make a 100-hour game, having branching storylines is a good way to do that. However, from a player perspective, it does mean that the quality goes down because they're not viewing new content. They're just most of their gameplay on the second playthrough is going through the old stuff again. So I'd say it makes for a less compelling game in general. That's a separate topic. My point is, if you have a game which has chapters that you have to unlock, like you buy the first chapter of, say, I know the Batman game was one that I really liked. You buy that first chapter. The people who are going to be buying the second chapter is going to be less than the first chapter. And so adding and completing those chapters will just give you continuing diminishing returns. And you can't stop making it. You have to keep making it because starting a new project from scratch is more expensive than adding a new chapter. So compared to starting over every time you finished that first chapter, this is still your best bet, but it is a bet which gets worse and worse per chapter. And I'm sure they've financed it out to figure out exactly like how far ahead can we get with the chapters, but it's such a slim margin and it's such a difficult thing to balance that, frankly, when I heard that they'd went under, I was sad, but I was not really surprised because it's a very difficult thing to balance. Systemic gameplay allows you to focus a lot more on improving the player quality as well as improving the player experience quality, not the player quality. I'm gonna make you into a better player. It's like the Dark Souls motto. Anyway, point is, industry-wide, this stuff happens, and it can sink even the best companies. So be careful if you find yourself locked into story games. And so, but finally, retention. This is the final showdown, essentially, with players returning. Does a player, a week after they've played Roses, do they come back versus do they not come back? And for anyone who is struggling to see how it has such a low retention rate, who here has watched a good movie, and then how often do you watch that same movie within the next day? Maybe on the seventh day later. Because just to clarify, D7 retention rate, the day 7, that's literally like people who only showed up 7 days after, not people who showed up between their first show up and the next 7 days. That'd be week 1 retention rate. I'm talking about people who showed up specifically on day 7. And you'll see it's like people don't return to it because a story would have to be really good to show up more than like to keep reading the exact same story and keep viewing and having the exact same experience again and again. But with systemic gameplay, being able to provide new experiences every time, well, you get to return. You get to enjoy those higher retention rates, and thus you'll keep earning more money from it. And so that can be great. That can be really helpful. And so with this is usually what it looks like when you have a systemic game versus a linear story game. And so you have Totally Accurate Battle Simulator. Both these are single player games, by the way, to help even the playing field. And you have Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, which is systemic, which allows you to do more things, and updates to it can easily add new layers, versus Firewatch, which sort of released at its own complete package, and people enjoyed it, but then it sort of fell down. Yeah, it's just a very difficult thing to compete against. It's a strategy which really doesn't reward you for that extra effort. And so at the end of the day, look at this. Unless you really think that your game has to have like a linear story mode to work, because there are some games that are like that, and I don't personally make them because, as you could see, they're very difficult to make viable. Systemic gameplay is just the best way to go. And so those are systems. Those are systemic gameplay versus linear gameplay, and why I think it's very important for you to learn about it. So let's actually make a game. We have here a meme. You're welcome. Anyway, so for the sake of a future Tesla, let's make a systemic game. Loops. At their core, systems are about loops, and let's actually figure out what those kind of loops are. The first one that you should really consider, in my opinion, is engagement loops. Many people will say the core loop is the first to consider, but in my opinion, it's much easier to construct the core loop from an engagement loop. Now, this may look like almost like this looks kind of, I don't know, like some weird internet computer art or something, but the gist of it is that at every moment, your player will have various levels of goals. Like the stuff that they immediately want to do, like say, I want to shoot in that direction. The stuff where like, I want to get behind cover, that'd be like the 30-second loop. I want to find some more ammo, that'd be like a 1 to 2 minute loop. I want to capture an enemy point, that's the 1 to 2 minute loop. And so you have all these different layers of loops, and brother, and so that can go onward indefinitely. Like I'd say for most traditional games, you'll usually have people planning all the way out to the hours, tens of hours, because when someone buys a game, you want to be able to keep enjoying it for a long time. However, designing these goals and designing the player experience with these goals in mind, I think really allows for you to better appreciate what motivates your player. And that actually, speaking of that, let's talk about player motivation. Go check out my last talk on player motivation if you want to hear more about this. But the gist is, all game experiences can be broken down to somewhere on this spectrum, from more social to more success based to more survival based, with overlapping areas. It just to, I guess, give you some examples. I would say a first-person shooter is mostly survival, but if it's a more team-based one, or even more, even just versus other players, I would say that makes it more social. And so that'd be like a game like Arsenal would be in the red zone between social and survival. Success and survival, those are typically survival crafting games. I think would be a good example. Success games, you could see those as I like stuff like Cookie Clicker, or a simple tycoon game or simulator where just the act of progressing through the game is what makes it compelling. And so that's the success side of things. For social versus for social success, I guess probably the closest I can think of would be Bloxburg, because the feeling of accomplishment when you complete your house, as well as the social aspects of getting to invite people in it. And so I'd say a sandbox game would probably be right in the center between all of those, because you can do whatever you want in them. But yeah, player motivation. So figure out who is this player you're making the game for, because that'll help inform your future design decisions. And yeah, there's a whole hour and a half I could say about this, but we don't need to. Yeah. So let's take a moment to apply various success metrics to this engagement loop. You have Tower of Hell, which is, if you don't know, it's a platformer game where you have to climb to the top of a tower. There are no checkpoints. It's procedurally generated. It's a systemic game, which it's probably one of the best systemic platformers on Roblox currently, and it does very well because of it. The systemic nature keeps it fresh. The social nature keeps it compelling, and as well as accomplishing getting to the top of that tower is very thrilling. And so we have all these goals that players get to engage with. The immediate goal, like being like, don't fall, don't fall. Like, that is what you're thinking about at every moment. Don't fall, don't fall. And then, obviously, the next goal layer would be like, oh, I want to reach the platform over there. Okay, that's my goal there. And after that, it's like, well, I want to reach a new ring color. Like, I want to get out of this current color and feel that sense of progress. But then finally, you reach the top. And you notice we did have to skip the 5 to 6 one, because honestly, I don't think there are any 5 to 6 minute goals here. It really doesn't have one. And in my opinion, I think that the game is probably less off for it. I think you want to have goals at pretty much every level, because if someone isn't too compelled by the reach the top goal, well, they're going to have to go a long time from the 1 to 2 minute goal to that goal, and it won't matter as much to them. If you always have a new goal just a little bit out of reach, that'll keep driving them forward and keep driving them to progress through your game. And so I think not having these sort of blank none areas, I think that works to the detriment of the game. And yeah, and keep in mind, at every moment they should have that goal. Like, it's worth mentioning that once you reach the top, you're essentially out of goals. Like, you can't. So like, you have to. You have to keep on providing new goals. I'm guessing they have like a leaderboard system to provide goals farther than that. But make sure your player is never at a point where they're like, well, what next? Because if they're thinking what next, they're thinking, why should I come back here? I've already done everything. So yeah, this engagement goal loop is very important for player engagement. And so yeah, we have next Survive the Killer. I actually know a few of the devs on this. They're very, very excellent people, and I'm glad to see the game's done so well. And they actually, in my opinion, have done a slightly better job with the engagement loop. Just providing a like the very basic one is run, like just get out of here, like escape the killer. But then also finding a good place to hide. You could argue that when they're hiding, like shelter in place is essentially the first thing the immediate core loop, but I'd say running is probably the one that happens the most. But yeah, finding a good hiding spot, next 30 seconds. If they hear team members in trouble, they might want to help their team out. And then the end of round goal is to escape, but then also to provide more of a goal for the average player, which will probably only play around 10 to 12 to 20 minutes. A daily objective could be quite helpful. And I think like that's the thing. These extrinsically set goals by the developers can be very useful for the long-term stuff. I'd say for stuff like daily objectives and long term like leaderboard climbing, those are always going to be long term goals. You can't really make that work on a shorter term goal. And yeah, so that's the survival aspect. And then the socially motivated one, I'd say the best case in point would be Adopt Me. With I'm sure you all have heard of that game. Yeah, and I realized looking at this right now that the text down there is a little bit tiny, so I apologize. But it says immerse. The first 5 seconds one is immerse. You at every moment in Adopt Me, players are in a fantasy essentially. They're living this life where they're this wealthy person who gets to dress in all the clothes they like, and they have cars, and they have a nice house, and it's a fantasy. And so in a sense, that every moment, that core of the engagement is just to feel more immersed in that role. And so if that means like playing in first person, or like picking up a coffee cup, or sitting down like looking out the window, like those are the things that we're doing at every moment because they want to feel more immersed. And so from there on, they probably like, okay, well, this is in my immersion, in my fantasy, I'm popular, so I need to find other people to help further that. So they'll have more longer term goals, such as finding others. They'll then role play with them, possibly like oh, hello, my name is insert name here. Are you my brother? Like they'll make these little family units or friend units and all that stuff, and that's their next goal. And then they'll want to do things with those new friend groups. They might even do house parties, and then long term. Now the last two I'd say could be swapped. There's an argument for them to be swapped, but having upgrading your house is a longer term goal because you need to like work to do that, and you need to do all these things. And with these engagement loops, they can be a bit confusing because the more systemic a game is, arguably, the more your paths can branch out. And really, this really only shows the engagement goals for a single path. So when creating these in practice, you'll want to have almost modular sections of this loop. Know what things will change at any point. Like typically the earlier areas, like the role play, I'd say up to do activity with friends, those will stay fairly consistent throughout the game because I'd say that encompasses the core loop. But then farther out, feel free to swap those out in your designs as they play, as you consider different parts of the game. Because the player goals will change. They're not going to be static, and that's great. They're supposed to not be static because that can keep it fresh. And if players have multiple goals to choose from, they'll find the one which best fits them. And so you sort of have it auto-optimize. Yeah, and so when it turns to like player action and all that, let's see, just a second, just double checking something. All right, yeah, sorry. Yeah, and so one other thing to consider when designing your core loop is that player action needs to matter. You'll find that you can't just make a game like Natural Disaster Survival without allowing the player to do something. In that game, it's move around, and that moving around will change how they will change their state. They have to be able to interact with the system. You can't just make a procedural art generator. Like this I know this may seem like not much, but in a recent game of mine, which I was working on the side, we came to realize that the types of that players just weren't engaging with the game because they'd play it once and they'd realize, oh wait, so you can do it multiple different. So it's a platformer game. So the platformer segment regenerates every time. Oh, that's cool. Okay, I'm going. Like they didn't really care if they won because there wasn't really much they could do to not win. Like either there weren't too many strategies they could use. There weren't too many things that they could do to make it personally fit them. And the more you can get a player to be able to interact with the system, like it's compelling. It allows them to have that kind of that sort of engagement, that hands-on tactile experience, which can personalize and really immerse them in the game. And I'd say that's for every game style. I wouldn't say there's a single game type or player motivation which would benefit from less player actions. Now, don't overwhelm them. that's a different thing. But just in general, if you can make their actions matter more, you will make a better systemic game. In some ways, I think that's what actually holds back games like Murder Mystery 2, because as an innocent person, you can't do too much. Ideally, I think that they would allow it for people to have more roles for the innocents. But I mean, hey, it's balanced at the moment, and people like it, so don't change something that works. But if I had to design a game like that, I would say providing more options for players can be compelling. And I think you should always make sure that players at least have the feeling that they can make an impact on their world. Because otherwise, who wants to play a game where you're powerless and can't do anything? It's like, I mean, sort of maybe like a horror game, which even then, though, you can usually still run. Like, I don't see how that could be a compelling experience. And so, yeah. Let's next talk about actually the core loop. I mentioned it earlier, but yeah, the core of the game, these are the actions that you do at the very beginning. Like if you look at the 1 to 2 like the 30 seconds, 50 second, 5 to 30 second mark, typically you run through this in a few minutes. You'll run through this core loop. This one in front of you right now is from Minecraft Survival Mode, because what I love about Minecraft Survival Mode is its core loop is in its name. Mine, craft, survive. I love it. It's so elegant, and it really does make the most of it. And so yeah, we have the mining part, we have the crafting part, and we have survive. So in order to craft stuff, you have to have resources, which means you have to mine. And crafting stuff will help you survive, and surviving is needed to mine. You can't mine when you're dead. And so yeah, you have all of these three aspects which feed each other, and the player will just keep flowing through it. They'll keep following those arrows around and around and around, and that is a well-designed core loop. It's one that succeeded for years, and yeah. So it's ideally you'll want your core loop to change the context of the other main like aspects of it, the major tokens, and yeah, that's what a good core loop does. But for your game, just take that initial motivation. Say survival. You'll notice Minecraft, interestingly enough, I'd say is actually since it's a sandbox game, it kind of exists in all three of these. But you'll see that the success-based stuff, like the success in survival, crafting, and crafting is very much a success-based thing. Like you have accomplished something, you've made something new, and surviving. Well, that obviously there are a lot of like fast-paced, like, oh no, a zombie's about to kill me, like that stuff is compelling in its own sense. So like you'll see the player motivation represented in the core loop, because the player is doing the core loop at all times, and if the core loop is not supporting the player motivation, then you're not doing it right. Like if your main mechanic in, say, a horror game, which is about survival, like it's a game that blood pumping, I'm about to die. If the main mechanic in that is like, I don't know, designing a tycoon or something, like that's not, like you can see how that just doesn't even make sense. Like you need to have that core loop support that motivation, because if it doesn't, you won't get that play experience. A horror tycoon will never be a horror experience, because the focus in the core loop is on success. It motivates you. Feel you the emotions you get come from creating or succeeding in certain things. And so if you want to do a horror tycoon game, you have to add mechanics and aspects to the core loop which change that. And I guess 7 Days to Die is probably the closest I can think of, where you design like a base to survive a zombie attack, which is a way of sort of doing that. But you have to consider this in the player loops and core loops and gameplay. And so yeah, creating these systems is quite spoilers. It is quite it's quite important. And so now that we actually have created the core loop, let's talk about adding the secondary loops to it. How balancing loops, I think, are a great example of how you can add to your core loop in a meaningful way. Balancing loops. If a certain strategy is too effective, you can lessen it. You can control it. It is your putting your foot on the brake, and you'll see it as it can be an excellent way to combat certain strategies being too effective. For instance, like camping. Camping is cheating. It's a legitimate strategy. Think about for a moment if the very solutions people have tried to camping over the years. For one, a very basic one would just be not allowing people to would be as you get closer to an enemy spawn zone, your weapons can be less effective. So that would kind of force the combat to happen in the center of the maps. And also, it has a benefit of sort of making the game more difficult as you get closer to the other side. But yeah, no, there's a whole lot of ways you could balance something to make certain strategies less effective. And so balancing loops, those slow things down. It's important that because the alternative is reinforcing loops. The reason I have a nuclear explosion here is because the best way to explain a reinforcing loop is just a runaway reaction. It is, in the case of a nuclear bomb, fission happens where an atom explodes and the pieces go and make other atoms explode. They go and make other atoms explode. Next thing you know, you have all these exploded atoms and a bunch of released energy, and that's a nuclear explosion. Another example would be a rocket, where like a rocket in space, where every extra bit of fuel they burn makes it go faster and faster and faster, and it keeps on like going faster and faster due to that continued push from the system, which in this case would be a reinforcing loop. And so reinforcing loops are very helpful for just they provide excitement. Like I'd say in natural disaster survival, an example of a reinforcing loop would be having, I guess, the disasters destroy the terrain, because just having a disaster move around without destroying the houses and the map, nothing really gets more dangerous. Like from the beginning of, like, say, a lightning storm to the end of it, if your house is never destroyed, everything's kind of static, nothing really moves. But since the house is being destroyed, the game gets exponentially harder as you have less and less cover to use. And so that's a reinforcing loop used to make the game more compelling, used to add more excitement. Whereas a balancing loop in that game would be probably the aspect of having the player, when they die, spawn in the lobby, not immediately re-enter. It forces the player to be safer, to slow down, to not just jump off of things. And it, too, can be very... while it does slow down and make stuff a little bit less action-packed, because you'll be less willing to do certain dangerous things, it can provide a sense of suspense. It can make things more difficult for you. And so in combining these two things together, in making the game more hard, but also making the game harder, and while at the same time making the stakes higher, you have a very compelling it's building a mountain of just this of good engagement moments, of good fun player moments. And so yeah, those are the two loops you'll use to add to your core loop. So let's actually see what that looks like. So here's an example of adding secondary mechanics to a core loop. These are things like you have Minecraft Survive. Once again, you can sort of tell where you'll have certain aspects such as eating food to avoid starving. Starving makes surviving harder, whereas mining makes whereas this mechanic also encourages people to mine, but it makes it more likely that they'll die. So that's why it says like eat food to avoid starving is red arrow to survive, because it makes the player do that less, whereas making them mine more. So if you find that like your game is not hard enough and people aren't really dying, the food mechanic, well, that's an example where you can make it where you can really allow them to, what's the phrase? Oh yeah, where you can really incentivize them to do various things while also making it more difficult to survive. And so you can hit two birds with one stone. And really, a good mechanic should focus on multiple aspects of the core loop. You don't want to adjust just one in isolation. You want to adjust multiple. And in fact, you'll see the one in the center that adjusts all three. And actually, I realized I put that arrow backwards. But the point is, with crafting better tools, that is something which encourages you to mine, because you have to get the resources. It encourages to mine because when you have a pickaxe that's like a diamond pickaxe, you can mine more things. Whereas also crafting better tools, well, that encourages you to craft because that means you can unlock new things for crafting, and it encourages you to survive because it helps. Like a better armor can help you survive. So crafting better tools, that's a mechanic at the core of, I'd say, the crafting aspect that really just helps everything. And so that's a being able to craft tools in a crafting game, because you don't necessarily have to. You could have them just like craft like houses and stuff. Being able to craft better tools is something which really does just help Minecraft in a way which no other mechanic really does. And yeah, you can see this all over the place, like enemies dropping valuables, enemies losing objects on death. So like all these different things are shaping the core loop, and you can use these kind of mechanics to better balance it. And so I think let's take a moment to appreciate what a reinforcing loop and a balancing loop look like on this diagram. A balancing loop. Let's find a good one. So typically, red equals balancing loop. A red-green combo, that is a balancing loop, because you'll have it encourage one thing at the cost of another. And so that means if one area is too big, you'll have a... Sorry, I've completely misspoke. Your mechanics, it's about a loop. It's not about a single set of lines. So let's look at the... let's see, what's a good one? Okay. Here's an example. I'm sorry, I'm just losing focus, y'all. I'm pretty tired. But losing objects on death would be an example of a balancing loop, because it forces the player to be more cautious. It forces them to, and really it should be referencing survival up there, but it forces the player to slow down. Whereas obviously unlocking a reinforcement loop would be crafting better tools, where you see it sort of flows. Like if you can see a loop where it's only green, and I guess the core white loop, when it's only green in the loop, that is a reinforcing loop. And honestly, with and when it's red green, that you could see that more as a balancing loop, where it slows stuff down. But yeah, so I mean, honestly, core loops, don't feel bad if you don't really get it. It just write them as you see fit. There's certainly no perfect way to do it. There's no perfect standard. They're really just meant to explain how players' motivation and goals move through a game, and how different mechanics can impact those goals. So yeah, just keep on doing that, and then as you actually playtest, you can adjust the core loop and add new mechanics and remove old ones to help encourage the player to move through things. Because you'll find when we talk about analytics later, a player could get stuck at one of these areas. They'll keep on mining for some reason, because because crafting's useless, and so you make crafting more helpful, more something that they'll actually want to do by adding some reinforcing loops, such as the crafting better tools, and all of a sudden they have a reason to craft, so they're moving out of mine and going into crafting. And then so we have all these different ways you can manipulate a core loop to make it more compelling. And finally, let's actually talk about making this a reality. We have one final loop to show you there. So, I'm officially out of water. So if my voice gets more and more hoarse, that is why. Yeah, so we have the from theory to reality to profit. Yeah. Let's see. So the road to making a new game viable. Release the game within 1 week. I know this is definitely going to be something that's brutal with people, and it's one that I struggle with. I only did it successfully a few weeks ago, where I was able to make a game in a week, and then immediately start testing it. It's going to be difficult, and it's okay to an extent if you don't get it. Like, the reason I'm saying this is not because there's something magical about 1 week, but because waiting too long to test your game is worse. If you think of production before test as debt you're taking on, you only want 1 week of debt, because if this fails, if this is something that you can't fix, if there's something horribly wrong with your game, you don't want to be 4 months into creating it and then realize, oh no, it's too late. I don't have enough time to fix this. I've seen that happen in my time with Developer SOS. Some of the most we were able to almost always improve some metrics for the games I helped out, but typically the one where many games just got stuck was because they just had too much debt of stuff that they just locked in and that would just take too long to undo. And that's because, frankly, this testing that I was doing with them should have started in like week 2 or 3 of development. You don't you want to start out your game small and then build outwards. You don't want to spend so much time. And when I say release your game within 1 week, I mean like one week of work. Like not necessarily like if you only work on like Saturdays, then like 7 weeks. But like only so much time. And yeah, my game Mortal Metal, something I made at a Roblox internship in 2019, it flopped, and it was terrible because I'd worked so hard on it, but I just hadn't really meaningfully tested it. I'd done play tests to really just check for bugs, but I never really did play tests considering the core gameplay, the actual player experience. And so when you play test, that's what matters the most. Here's the thing: who here can think of a few games which are kind of buggy but you still like? I can think of many. I'd say. So most of the games growing up that I enjoyed were crashing like once every day or two. Like games crashing does not necessarily make them unplayable. It doesn't so long as they're fun, you'll be okay with the crashes. You'll be able to do with some of the friction caused by those crashes. But the game has to be fun. A game with 0 bugs that isn't fun is not going to be played by anyone. A game with a ton of bugs that's fun, people will play it. Like, say what you will about the recent Cyberpunk game, some people still play it. There are people who play it. I wouldn't say it's the perfect game by any means, but it did succeed to engage a large portion of the audience, and despite all those bugs. And yeah, so it really just means you got to get that player experience right. You got to get that core motivation right. And so that's why you need to test early. Figure out how can I release my game within a week, and just do that. The only time I would advise not to do that is if you're making like a sequel to a game that's successful or an update. And even then, like with updates, like if they're taking too long, have testers test it out and figure out where stuff's going wrong. But with new game ideas, or like implementing something new, that unless you are proven already that this is going to work, you need to test as frequently as possible. Just know that if the longer you go without testing, the more you are putting at risk, and it could all end up being worthless. So never go farther between releases than you are willing to lose, because you can and probably will lose it. But yeah, so let's actually talk about what it means to playtest a systemic game, because this is, I'd say, where the more artistic aspects of design, with all these core loops and philosophies, which I think can be very helpful, but they're certainly not as ingrained in reality. Like this core loop stuff. The reality is we could both write this core loop differently, because you can play the game differently. You can enjoy it differently. You can find different aspects of it to be more compelling. And with a large audience, I can't really say you're wrong. Some people might have noticed Minecraft Survival Mode, there's no social aspect in that core loop, when I'd say it could be a very social game. So there's no perfect way to design a system, but there are certainly ways that are, I guess I wouldn't go as far as to say scientifically proven, but some very difficult to disprove ways. Where there is certainly a science to it, but it is a science which has so many variables that sometimes you'll just get a situation which doesn't fit the model. And that's okay. Most of the time it'll work, and so long as you understand the underlying reasons why it works, you can adapt to those situations. But with that being said, let's talk about how to actually use analytics and marketing to take a systemic game that isn't on the front page and get some players in it. So I guess let's set the scene here. You've just made a game in a week, and you're about to push it to an audience. You're about to have people play it for the first time. What analytics do you set up, and what analytics do you use to refine the game, and how do you convert numbers in a spreadsheet to an actual workable model? Well, I think the first thing before we can even get into the analytics, well, actually, yeah, we can. We can get into the analytics. The analytics that are most important are retention and engagement. Those are the two things which will make or break your game. It is so... it's very difficult for a game to succeed without those two things. In fact, I'm trying to imagine how it would even be possible. Like, maybe if your retention rate was bad and your engagement rate was really high, you might be able to... It's like if you take either metric to the extreme, you could kind of make it work, but it'd have to be so extreme that it's just not even feasible. Like, you need both those metrics to make a game succeed. You can't have a game that you play, that every person who joins it plays for an hour, but never comes back, because you're going to run out of players. You're going to run out of, you're not going to be able to hold that audience. You need to get people to come back. And in terms of retention, like, if people are only staying for 1 second, you'd have to have them come back like every other minute to like keep the game going high, and that'd be an insane retention rate. And so like you have to have these two core areas really settled to boost your game up. So those are what we're going to be looking at for analytics. And with that, let's actually discuss the final thing you need to make your analytics valid, and that is the understanding of the law of large numbers. A playtest that you run on one person is probably not very, very reliable. It could be a little bit reliable. But look at this. So this is just flipping a coin. As you flip a coin, more and more times, you'll find that at the first flip can be often as far as have an 80% error margin. That's insane. That is so unreliable. And unless what you're trying to find can still like be proven within that margin, which is very rare, you have to have more people to test it out. And so let's further look at this and see how it gets farther and farther together with 600. So we go from 0 to 400 to 600, and then you'll find by the time we get to around 600, things start to even out a bit. Like, there'll still be some variation, which is fine. Typically, I usually go for the golden standard of around 3,000, 3 to 4,000 is when you really get into like the 1% error margin range. But as you can see, you can't just base your conclusions off of 10 players entering your game, especially not if they're players you know. Because players you know, well, they're going to be a bit biased. They're going to play differently. And also, the players who keep returning to your game, your core audience, they're going to find they'll stick around and they're going to play differently. You need to focus on first-time players, at least when making a game big for the first time. Obviously, don't ignore your core base. Figure out how to keep them around. But like, your first-time players are where you will make or break engagement and retention. Because your core players, they've already been retained. They've already shown that they like this game. And so getting to them, like getting those players, you almost have to already have the retention and core engagement sort of figured out. And so in order to build a core audience, you have to have a good first-time player experience. And so always base this law of large number stuff on that kind of experience. And with these kinds of trials and with all of these... with all these different analytics data points, you need to bring in more people. You need to, and so I'd say at minimum, like 300 at best, unless you're like, if you're for like the bigger questions, like you need to have some really compelling results to trust a solution provided by 300 data points. And so the question is, how do you get this many people? Well, advertising. And this is a difficult thing to figure out. I think it's important to recognize advertising a game is an imperfect process. It is how Roblox's advertising method works is a mystery. It's in some ways because you'll have an advertisement do well on one week, and then like the CTR will just cut in half, and yeah, that's gonna suck. And so to an extent, you will have to. You may end up having to spend more money if your CTR suddenly dips, but it's worthwhile because trust me, data-driven solutions to your games are so reliable, are so useful, and we're going to get to how you can use them. Advertising a game early and then using that playtest data to refine and figure out where your game needs to be improved, it is the most direct way to guide development. It will help you so much. I had a game, the game I was talking about earlier, the platformer game. Recently, we released it within a week, and then we did about 3 or 4 days worth of tests, and each time we learned a lot of stuff. And we realized, okay, so people are getting bored after the first round of the platformer. Why is that? They must be seeing, and so we realized, okay, so how do we make them care about this round more? Well, the data showed us that no matter whether they won or lost, they would typically leave after one round. So just the more rounds that they experience, the less they'd care, which is a bad thing you want to figure out because that usually you want to have that be neutral at best because you don't want them to and to clarify, it wasn't how long they were staying. Like obviously the longer you stay, the longer you stay. Like that's kind of a weird correlation to make, but the more rounds they do, you want those to be equally enjoyable. You don't want it to become diminishing. And so through adding game modes, we were able to boost the play duration by almost, I believe it was almost 25%, and through a single update. And we were able to realize that because we could see where players were having trouble, what part of the core loop they were getting stuck on, and move over from it. And so yeah, we'll talk a little bit more on that. But just once again to finish up on advertising, sponsoring a game right now is not a great idea. Sponsorships through the Roblox system give you a very low return on investment. Advertising is the best way to go. And it'll get you also mostly PC players, which is good because PC players spend more on average. So that helps you out a little bit. If you are advertising on mobile, trying to get a mobile audience, then you might actually have to sponsor, which is not good because they've really messed up that system. So advertising your game is the way to go for now until they fix it. I'm hoping it's like just a data problem, but if they really think that's a reasonable rate, no one is ever going to make a game successful with sponsorships. It's just that it's too expensive. The cost per player is astronomical, and so in terms of advertising, also just a few hints: brighter colors and simple advertisements. Don't overcrowd your advertisements. Those will help you out the most. Those will get you higher play click rates. And on top of that, if you notice that an ad's underperforming and you won't be able to hit the a number of plays needed to get usable data, if you have the budget, immediately spend more because you need to hit that minimum player amount because otherwise the test might not be valid and you may have just wasted your original money. And so with that in mind, we also need to consider when determining how many players you need for a test, you also have to keep in mind server density. If your game can only be fun when there are a certain number of players in the game, then you can't then you can't just have an advertisement level. You can't have 500 players in a game which needs 30 players at all times to be fun, because if 500 players find your game spread out throughout an entire 24-hour advertising cycle, or more realistically 12-hour period, because about 75% of plays happen during the day, interestingly enough. Even though it's an international thing, Roblox is still mostly set on U.S. daylight hours. And so yeah, 75% of your audience will come during a period of 12 hours. And say there are 120 people who visit, and then they play for only 10 minutes each. Well, that means there's only about 10 people visiting per hour, which means that at any time there's only going to be like one or two people in your servers. And if your game needs 5 or 6 people to be fun, then you've sort of ruined your own testing data, because this isn't actually what a valid playtest would be like. So you have to make sure that you're figuring out these numbers before you advertise, that you figure out how many people need to be in my test to get some real life testing data. You have that. If you mess up this test, if you mess up any analytics training session, that data, honestly, I would say just don't even use it, because it is untrustworthy and it can steer you the wrong way, and steering yourself the wrong way can cost you a ton of time. Like, I've had games that I've helped out that that lost weeks because they had a single playtest give them the wrong idea because of some hidden because they forgot to consider something. And yeah, you got to be careful when you're drawing conclusions. But yeah, so let's actually talk about the analytics. So, analytics path tracking, taking the wrong message from 1984. Analytics path tracking is possibly one of the coolest and one of the more difficult things to do with analytics. It's not something everyone can be able to do. This is, for instance, what you're looking at right now is actually a custom tool that I made to, also someone has asked, how do teamwork games like Flood Escape get popular? Well, teamwork games can get popular. You just have to advertise them more. You have to make sure that the server is full enough to get that good data. And then obviously keep a retention rate so that the servers stay full after advertising, because you want to build that audience. And so you just have to hit that critical server mass of having at least one play session's worth of people at all times for a test, and then only take analytics data from during that test. So anyway, yeah, back to focusing on this. Analytics path tracking is the way it works is you record certain player events, such as them completing a certain aspect of the tutorial, them dying or killing someone, them reaching a new checkpoint, them buying something, them going to a new area of the map. Record those key moments, which allows you to get an idea of what they're doing, what they're thinking about. And then do that for every player. Record every event and then timestamp it so you know when it's happening in their play session. Compile all those events, and then also compile a profile of that player. Like, did they leave after 30 seconds, or did they stay for 2 hours? How many friends did they have in the server? How much did they spend? How is this their first time playing the game? Compile that profile about the player, and then combine the events of what they did with their profile together, and use that to sort of track how your entire game is actually flowing. How a player, what these player paths look like. With a player, oh, my nose just itches like crazy. I don't know why. It's probably because it just knows I'm on camera, and it's and so now it's gotta look like I'm picking my nose every 2 seconds. All right. Goodness. All right. Point is, analytics path tracking. You have the players joining the game. Goodness, did I actually? Am I like allergic to something here? All right. I'm so sorry. All right. Yeah, I'm good. Mostly. All right. So analytics path tracking. You can see on a high level how players move throughout your game, and you can figure out blocks. You can figure out where a player is getting stuck. And the reason I'm showing you this one is this is specifically from that platformer game I mentioned earlier. This is an earlier version of it that I sort of brought onto the team, and they had a tutorial that we actually advised at first because we were realizing that players weren't doing as well with the actual platform mechanics. We thought maybe if we taught them it'd be more helpful. And so we implemented a tutorial. But then we saw, using analytics path tracking, that the players, every time they completed a tutorial level, by the time they finished the tutorial, half of them had left. Half of them were gone entirely. And so we realized, oh wait, this is not making a fun game. People are going into this and they're leaving. And the coloring scheme here, this is actually, to explain it, red, the more red something is, the shorter the play duration was. The more green something is, the longer the play duration was. The actual saturation of it, like if something's a little bit more gray or white, that means that they did it multiple times in a row. And so that's how you can read it. You can set it up your own ways. Also, if you want me to use this tool on your game, I am available for contracting. This isn't really meant to be an advertisement for me, but I can't really share the tool itself because, proprietary and all that stuff. But hey, I'm more than happy to help. So yeah, in terms of actual analytics path tracking, shouldn't be too difficult to set up. I built the first version of this thing in a day. You can do the same. But get that player data and figure out what players are actually doing. Figure out on a high level how they're interacting with the game, and then correlate it with all of these with these very important moments. Figuring out okay, so for some reason when players do the tutorial, most of them don't stick around and most of them leave. That's bad, and we need to resolve that. I had another game which I helped out where we were realizing that 80% of players were never leaving the lobby. And so we sped up the lobby experience and helped reduce that. And so once again, just having these kind of tools available to track players moving through your game on such a high level is the ultimate tool. When I say it's taking the wrong message from 1984, it's because you're surveilling literally your entire audience and getting a snapshot of what the game really is like for every player. It is a massively helpful tool, and I've used it time and time again. This kind of stuff can make a single playtest so helpful, especially when you're able to do some more. I have some more hidden tools here, which I'm not even showing, that are when I say hidden, they're not a secret. It's just more you can't see them at the moment. Where if you click each node, you'll get a composite player profile of what kind of behavior is expected from this player at this moment. And so there are all these very useful things you can do with this analytics path tracking data. And the goal is that you'll be able to see the player move through the core loop. You'll be able to see them go okay, complete this, do this, okay, go back to this. And you'll see if people are always getting to this one part of the core loop and then exiting, then something's wrong there, and you need to figure out what. Your focus needs to be on fixing that. And so you're almost like a plumber. You're just removing clogs in the player path tracking until they flow all the way to the end towards an acceptable play duration. And then also widening up and adding more to areas where people are doing really well. If you look at the end of this platformer game, there were different platformer options available at first, and we found that people who went on certain areas first, they would they'd actually stay around longer. So we've realized, okay, for a while we considered, before actually going a different direction, we realized maybe if we put these areas closer to the spawn, people will probably play longer. And we didn't actually test that, but I'm certain it would be the case, because that's what the data shows. People who find these tracks have a better time. And so yeah, that's analytics path tracking. But it is a heavy-duty way to solve your problem. But if you can develop this tool, or heck, once I said pay me to let you use mine, you can really just track how the game feels and how players are moving through it. And this can be an excellent tool for debugging a systemic game, and through advertising your game and tracking how player behavior changes throughout the updates, you can you can do all of these amazing things with it. Someone has asked, what tools do you use to track analytics? So there are multiple different options. I think probably the most accessible one, probably the easiest one for y'all to set up, is maybe even just a data store. Just storing the data in a data store. People who don't know anything about HTTP or other analytics tools, the easiest is probably just data store. It's not the best. I'm not ever going to say that's the case, but just in terms of accessibility, if you can't figure out anything else that I'm about to talk about, data store, just store stuff as player data, then go through the player keys and just export all the data to a table, and then you can use it to work with. You can even print it as in a CSV format if you want to import it into an Excel sheet. But yeah, one thing that I feel like people don't appreciate about analytics, you don't want your analytics to be just a bunch of high-level metrics. Analytics that is just high-level metrics is almost useless. Not entirely useless, but it's like going to the doctor's office and when they ask where does it hurt, you just say I hurt. Like that's not gonna it's not gonna help them. Like you have so little information. Game analytics is good. I wish that it gave more granular. I believe that truly to help your game with analytics, you need to have a full control over the individual player data. You need to be able to do queries. You need to be able to separate stuff. Ideally, once they open up PlayFab to more people, go that route because that one is a lot better with that kind of stuff. Game analytics is probably one of the better tools for now. But if you can find so long as you find a tool that just allows you to directly interact with the player data, that is, sending it to a spreadsheet is fine. I think it might not be as secure, but sending it to a spreadsheet is good for smaller tests. It won't scale well. A spreadsheet, I can tell you right now, just off of the, a single playtest at the right size can give you, 6,000 data entries if you're tracking events like this, and that's gonna add up to a very big Excel sheet really quickly. So you might have to send it to a new one every test. But technically, an Excel sheet, I feel like there are enough tutorials using HTTP to post to an Excel sheet on Roblox to get that to work. And so long as my big hope for you is that just make sure you can see the data. Hold on to the data. Ideally, if you know SQL, it's very useful for this kind of data management and queries and all that stuff. But the KSI in PlayFab is also quite good. But no, invest in database solutions. I'm personally using my own private database just because that's really what I needed, just a place to get the data. And then I have it pre-formatted into the format I use for my own analytics tool tracking things. So yeah, start building up analytics tools for yourself. PlayFab is great. Game analytics is okay. There aren't too many good alternatives at the moment. But honestly, make your own tools. If you feel that the tool isn't answering your question, so long as you have access to the raw data, you can do your own tools. You can the tool I have in front of me right now, it uses Lua. It's actually made in the Roblox engine. Yeah. So there are a ton of ways to take the data you have and then make these kind of queries and isolate the data in ways that are useful and helpful. And if this is seeming too scary, too difficult, there is one that is a little bit easier to do. This path tracking is something which I love and has been so helpful, but it is not going to be easy enough for everyone to do. Yeah, and really, a correlative matrix is probably more accessible to y'all and can help y'all's games out a lot more. So let's look at the actual. Let's look at this. So, positive correlation, to those who don't know, that is when a change in A causes a change in B, directly. A correlation of 1, that is changing A will change B proportionally. It'll cause an exact change in magnitude. A negative correlation is change in A will cause the opposite change in B. If it's -1, then it's of equal magnitude. And a correlation of 0 means that changing A has no impact on B whatsoever. And Excel can do correlations. There are various Lua formulas online you can use or actually there's math equations to tell you how to do it in Lua if you need to. But yeah, there's many different ways to get correlations. And what you do is just list out every variable you're tracking and then basically correlate it with every other variable. And you'll see here, obviously, you'll see going diagonally, all of the variables which are correlated against themselves, that's a correlation of 1, because obviously when variable changes, a variable changes. That's not too surprising. But look at all the other ones. Look at, say, variable AB's correlation. Variable A and B. It's a 0.93, so that makes me think that variable A, when it changes, it has a strong influence to B. And oftentimes, when you use a correlative matrix, you'll find that, people, you'll find that a lot of dumb ones, you'll find that correlations whoa, did you know that how long a player stays correlates with their exit time. Like, it's like, yeah, there will be some very basic ones, but some of the more, but where it can be helpful is when it's not expected, such as in the platformer game I was referring to earlier. We realized that winning the game correlated to a negative 0.3 in play duration. So that means if you won the game, you'd likely play it less. Same thing if you lost the game. So just completing the game led to them wanting to play it less. And for a systemic game, that shouldn't be the case, because hypothetically they're supposed to have a new goal in front of them. So we realized, thanks to that correlation, that they were lacking goals. They were lacking motivation to keep going. And because of this, we were able to establish some more variety in game modes, allowing that 25% boost we saw. And so, yeah, just all these correlative matrix, it's fairly easy to set up in Excel, fairly easy to set up anywhere, or even just if you want to check out very specific variable correlations with others, if you have access to the player data, you can do that. Like, just hold on to that player data. I can't stress this enough. Do not trust an analytics tool to just give you a high-level view of things. They are not smart enough to know exactly what you need. You are. And that's why you need access to the data. And yeah, so I mean, like, that's how you make a game. You got to follow the fun. If your game is like, if you find that some people are playing your game in a way that makes them stay longer than say the route you originally planned, build out that route. A fun game is a fun game, even if it doesn't fit your vision. Like, don't throw away a good opportunity. Make that fun the core of the game. Like, don't let it be something that they just occasionally experience. Embrace the best parts of your game and put them in the front. And analytics is a great way to isolate that. And on top of that, though, like, keep improving your game. I've been doing this for a long time, and even with my last platformer game, like I ran about 2 or 3 tests with this new version of the game that really didn't tell me too much. Like, it told me basically what I already knew, and it kind of left me sort of like up in the air, like, well, how do I fix this? And so I kept improving. I have kept changing the analytics and the questions I was asking and how I was looking at it. And I kept updating the game and seeing through A/B tests, like testing the game under one scenario and then testing it under another. Like, through A/B tests, I was able to figure out, okay, wait, so this is a better way to do this, and this is how I improve this. And slowly the game did pick up momentum, and it did grow. And it can be torture for those times when you don't see it grow, when you feel like you made a change and nothing happened, where you try to do something to fix something and you saw nothing. Like, you're gonna make bad moves. You're gonna make updates that just don't help you out, and that sucks. I feel like too many people in these sort of conversations are gonna be like you gotta fight through it. You're so strong. You're so cool. You're gonna be the next Steve Jobs. You might not be. It's gonna suck. There are gonna be days when you doubt it, and there are gonna be days when it's just miserable. And I just want you to know that just because it sucks for now, that it's not permanent. You can, if you keep improving your game, if you keep on focusing on it, you will eventually figure out what's wrong. As to whether or not it's worth your time at that point, that's up to you. I can't tell you that. All I know is that if you keep on trying new things with analytics, you keep on testing it, you keep on iterating on it, you will see results eventually. Will it be enough to keep your business afloat? I don't know. It's difficult. My own business, it's one that for the first few months, it was a little bit iffy, but I was able to build off of some things and grow areas in different directions, and overall, I've been able to stay afloat. I've been able to keep things going, and things just seem to be getting better and better. And so yeah, just keep improving your game. My biggest game, Superhero Life 1, my biggest series was Superhero Life, but the first game in it, Superhero Life 1, when it first released, flopped. Nobody played it. Nobody really liked it. The character creator system was unusable, honestly. And there were major bugs, and it was depressing because you want to make this game do really well, and then when it doesn't, it's like, oh, well, maybe there's no point. There is a point. As to whether or not you'll reach it, that's up to you. But there is that point. I refuse to believe a single game can't be updated into working. It's just whether or not it is worth the effort. And I tend to lean towards most games are worth the effort. Sometimes reality disagrees with that, but I think if you have the stamina to update and keep improving your game, you need to do that. And so, yeah. And then on top of that, I guess, most of all, keep learning. Mortal Metal is a game which I learned a lot from. I made it at my internship, and it flopped, and it was miserable. It really just left me sort of reeling, because people have been telling me all summer, like, whoa, this game is awesome. This is going to do so well. It was getting hundreds of likes on Twitter. I was feeling like I was the king of the world. But it flopped. It flopped, and I couldn't. And by the time I figured out what was wrong, I realized, oh, it's just too big. And I didn't know how to cut it down to get to a size where it would work. And it was just so emotionally exhausting that I just couldn't work with it. It was just too much of a stain at that point. And maybe one day I will feel ready to take it back up. But no matter what, whether you continue the game or not, you can learn from your mistakes. Mortal Metal flopped. If my next game flops, it will be not for the reasons Mortal Metal did. And that gives me some security because I can keep making games. I can keep knowing that, yeah, I'm growing. I'm learning from this. I don't have to make this mistake again. That was miserable. That is the last time I will have to experience that. So yeah, keep learning. Don't give up. You got this. And thank you for watching. Yeah, I'd say today's presentation was a little bit... It was a little bit more high level than I'd say the previous one was. And in that sense, I don't think it was as good of a presentation, but I think it still had some very useful things there. And it really is what I've learned in my career as a developer of how to grow these games. And I think if I were to do it again, I would focus more on almost the implementation stuff at the end, because I feel like what was more interesting to talk about. But the don't throw away the high level stuff. That stuff is going to be very important. A little bit of pre-production can save you a lot of time. But yeah, just stay nimble, stay agile, keep making that game. And if you have any questions, well, now's the Q&A time. Yeah, no, thank you all for showing up. Yeah, let's see, we've kept around 30 people, so that's like a classroom. And I'm honored to have been able to keep a classroom worth of people around to talk about some very like high level tech stuff. Like, it's not stuff that you necessarily fill out an auditorium for. But yeah, no, it's great. Thank you all for showing up. And yeah, so yeah, Q&A is now happening. I guess I'll just chill here because I know there's a little bit of a delay. So y'all just ask some questions. Let's see. Yeah, it's it's just chilling. All right. Yeah. No. And obviously, if you feel free to throw out if you have some very your game specific questions, I'd be more than happy to give my hot take on it. Though I would not necessarily recommend using that hot take as gospel, but maybe use it as a way to go on to figure out stuff for yourself. Confirm it before relying on it, at least. Yeah. So let's see. Do you have any advertising tips? Yes. Bright colors. Just bright colors. Don't overcomplicate it. If you can catch someone's eye and they click it, they'll bring it in. Then that's the best metric, that CTR. And then also make sure that your game icon, your game thumbnail is good and matches the advertisement. Because if someone clicks the ad and then sees that the game looks nothing like that, well, then they're not going to play, because there's a drop off. People will click the ad and then not play the game. The ratio can be as good. A good ratio for that is about 50%. If 50% of people who click your ad are playing your game, then that's good. But they won't all. Not all of them will do that. Some of them will just click the ad and be like, oh, that looks actually kind of ugly. I don't want to do that. And so we had a really nasty 18% of people who were clicking the ad were playing the game back for one of the earlier tests. And that wasted a lot of money. Like that wasted a few, probably I think like $20, which I guess isn't a lot of money, but I don't know. It feels like a lot of money with an indie budget. But yeah, so make sure to monitor your advertisements. Make sure you know that how many players you're getting out of it, and look up some techniques for like if you look up some online advertisements, you'll find they're almost always very simple, not too much text. There are some bright colors. They pop from the screen. Also, look at like YouTuber like thumbnails. Like, look at your favorite YouTubers for Roblox YouTubing, and you'll find that like those clickbait things work. I'm not saying necessarily clickbait because, well, just it's a bit gray. It almost feels like lying at times. But if you're comfortable with a more visually colorful and that maybe even some like showing some of the reactions from it, because like I'm guessing some people who play your game will have very like intense like, wow, this is awesome, whoa. So like it's not necessarily bad to show that, but all the same, marketing ethics is its whole little thing. And point is, brighter colors, simple, compelling imagery, and yeah, also advertising certain times of the day. So certain days of the week, you will get a lot more impressions for your Robux. Let me actually double check that. I've been recording it a little bit so on the side, and it once I actually have enough data, I might even publish it as just like a full like, hey, these are the days which are best. But like you can double the amount of impressions you have per Robux just by advertising on a Monday as opposed to the weekend. Like Sunday, the impressions per Robux was about 59 last Sunday. The Monday before that, it was about 100, 108. So like, when you choose to advertise your game, it can matter a ton. Yeah, so look out for that. Maybe track it on your own side. But let's see. So that's advertising. Yeah, no, honestly, yeah. I would love to show a video of actually like breaking down some advertising data. Maybe at some point I can do like a week-long game jam where I just like try to release and make and release a game in a week, just to show off all that. But I need a more stable. I need to make sure that my actual games are out before then, because that would be of course a big amount of time to devote to something like that. And yeah, so let's see. Yeah, but no. I took a game analytics class, which I got an A in and had a great time in. So I might be a little bit more analytics minded than some people. I know some of you saw my video. I do consider myself somewhere on the spectrum, and so do some therapists. This isn't just a self-diagnosis. No, but I might be a little bit more numbers acclimated than some people, but I do think that anyone can approach analytics. I feel like how far you get may vary. Your miles per gallon may vary, but there is always something you can learn from entry specific, from player specific levels of data. Yeah, and let's see. So let's see. Unseen Cow. I'm working on a big game, but it can be hard to keep motivated and working. Any tips? So I guess two things. Actually, it's one thing. I found that actually I'm gonna go with two things. Okay, so let me actually swap up. I have a Q&A camera, so let's see. We can see. Oh yes, here I am. Yeah. So with the sorry, I forgot what we're talking about. Oh yeah, motivation. I get bored during certain mechanics. Making UI specifically is very boring to me. It takes like there's so many little adjustments you got to make, and it's a bunch of back end infrastructure stuff, and it's just it's boring. Not a huge fan of it. And so what I've done with when working with UI is really just try to do things as differently and as weirdly as possible. Like there's this for UI specifically, I made this cool little backend thing which allowed me to save some time and do a lot of cool modular stuff I hadn't seen before with other UI implementations I tried. I also implemented this cool this cool aesthetic called neumorphism into my UI, which I thought was very pretty, and I haven't really seen in too many games. And so I felt like I was doing more exciting stuff with an area of the game which I wasn't really excited about before. So make your game like make the actual creation of the game interesting. Yeah, obviously make the game fun, but it should be fun to make. If it's not fun to make, then you can change that. You can try something new. And honestly, trying something new is probably how you get some of the more innovative features. Trying the same stuff over and over again isn't going to help you too much. So yeah, if you're struggling with a certain area of your game, sit back and think, well, what can I do differently that could possibly help make it better, but also would be more interesting to try? Because I found most developers are very curious, very engineer-like people, where they'll want to try new things. They'll want to experiment. And so yeah, experiment away. Don't hold yourself back from having a enjoyable development time. Though it's not perfect, you'll still need days to rest. You'll still experience burnout if you work too hard, but yeah, definitely just try to keep things interesting for yourself. Let's see. Why do you think newer modern developer recreations of National Disaster Survival don't do as well as the original? I think it varies depending on on the actual game. I think one thing that National Disaster Survival does really well is just the physics aspect of it. It really just manages to get the actual destroyable nature of the environments feeling very compelling, and it's just such a very well balanced game. It's elegant. Didn't talk too much about elegance, but the more that a single mechanic can influence the game, the better. Like, obviously don't make it so it overwhelms them. Like, don't make it so that if you press the L key, all of a sudden like 80 different stats change. That they won't be able to track that. But the more you can do with a single thing, the more elegant it is. That's why Minecraft is so amazing. In Minecraft, destruction of the environment as well as crafting use the exact same system. The spawning of enemies and survival and threats all use the exact same terrain generation system. So it all weaves together into one sort of because Minecraft, while we can isolate certain aspects of the mechanic, the game itself, like the terrain interaction with the player and generation, is really one mechanic that just does so much we have to split it up. So we're focused on making elegant mechanics. Don't make a new system every time you need to accomplish something. See if you can reuse old stuff. And I think Natural Disaster Survival is an extremely elegant game where there's very little waste. I'd say in terms of waste, most of it comes from monetization, which, I mean, you gotta monetize it somehow. So I think it could, but even then, it's not too much of a problem. It still doesn't manage to do many things. Like the multi-disaster mechanic is monetization is very it can make the game more fun for many people, while also obviously doing income, while also providing the person being who spends it ha ha ha, all the attention is on me, which can be compelling. It's a very well balanced game, and I think in terms of why the other ones don't succeed, I think you have to do a game by game basis for that. There's not going to be one reason why they don't succeed, but in general, it'll be because they failed to replicate that chaotic and fun motivation and systemic, infinite scenario generation that Natural Disaster Survival can do so well. So yeah, read into it for yourself. Go figure out. It's okay, why when I play this, how is the experience different, and does that experience make the game better or worse? Because here's the thing. Why I love Natural Disaster Survival, it's not the perfect game. You can do better with it. In fact, most games which haven't been updated for years can be done much better. Because, if you look at a game like Factorio, which is a heavy systems game, which is constantly updated, they're always adding new stuff. You can always add more. You're never going to run out of new things to add. It's just sometimes when the game's put on pause, it's now there's an opportunity for someone else to improve upon it because it's no longer being grown. And yeah, so let's see. Oh yeah, and thank you for all the kind comments, y'all. I do appreciate it. I always get a little bit nervous when I do these things. Let's see. So definitely think about the stuff. And if you guys are looking for good books on systems, my professor, Mike Sellers, I learned a lot of my systems thinking from him. So definitely buy his book if you have the budget. It's a college textbook, so it's going to be more expensive. But if you're a professional developer who has the money to spare, I'd say give it a shot. Also, you're supporting a pretty nice guy. So, yeah, win-win. I'm happy to say that, like, I feel like sometimes when people talk about, like, others they know in the industry, it's like, oh, yeah, that person's actually a jerk. Nah, Mike Sellers is one of the nicest people I've ever met. Okay. Great sense of humor, too. Mike, if you're watching, hi. So let's see. What would be the best way to grow a fan base, both pre-release and post-release, for not as well? Okay, so pre-release, it's Twitter. Honestly, like, it's Twitter. Pre-release, just post a bunch of stuff on Twitter, post development GIFs, development GIFs are better than development images. So if you post, like, my game, I grew Night Cycle Studios, my own development studio, from 300 people to almost 2,000. No, it's from 300 people to about 1,000 over a single summer because I was posting development GIFs every other day. Those can take you really far, and the initial 300 came from pre-existing people in the community. So obviously that gives it a little bit of a boost. But if you can post under the Roblox dev hashtag and you post something cool, it'll get momentum. You'll get followers. So I'd say that's the best pre-release marketing. Trailers are cool and can get momentum, but they take so long to make. I wouldn't recommend them. I really think that GIF-based prototypes and like day-to-day stuff can help you a lot more. Honestly, I wish I had a full-time social media person just to run that side of things, because there's always room to improve. And then post-release, it really is post-release. Focus on the game. Twitter's nice. Twitter will never compare to an actual good game. In my opinion, every game that, like, if you advertise your game for 5,000 Robux and it hits a server at so many people, you should be able to make that game get to the front page, as far as I'm concerned. If you have a good game, if you have a functional, perfect, if your game is great, you only need to do an advertisement once. Like, Superhero Life 1 was advertised once, and it got momentum. Actually, no, that's not true. It's advertised twice. The first once, it flopped. Second time, though, second advertisement, bam. Like, if you are having trouble getting the money to advertise on a regular basis, focus on monetization a bit earlier. Because if you can earn more per player than it does to advertise and bring that player to the game, so the industry term is average revenue per user, and I know, like, a cost per conversion maybe for the marketing. If your average revenue per user, or ARPU, is over your cost per conversion, or CPC, then you can essentially advertise indefinitely, and you can keep on building that audience. Because sometimes some games do need to be built up over multiple ads, but as long as your monetization is good, you should be able to afford that. So just focus on making that great game post-release, and if you don't have enough of a budget, focus on monetization earlier. I personally, if your game is, I think that in terms of actually earning money, I would say do monetization later, but just to keep advertisements from being overly expensive, earlier might be better for new devs. Let's see. What's your background before Roblox? I didn't have a background before Roblox. I joined Roblox when I was 10. They have a little documentary about it if you want to give that a shot. I don't really have much. I mean, I showed you guys the slides I made earlier of I've been making games for years, over 100 of them. I went to the internship where I got to have professional experience at Roblox, talking to some very smart people there who taught me a lot. I also I was a game design major for 2 years. I didn't graduate with that major because that would have required 3 years, and I'd already been in college for 2 years before that, so it had been 5 years total, and it didn't fit me perfectly. No, it just wasn't a good fit for me. But I still recommend it to people who really need that starting spot and are at college age. IU had a great game design program. It still does. I'm just not in it anymore. That's why I said past tense. And yeah, so I learned a lot of stuff from industry veterans there who have worked at big companies. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's just a little bit from everywhere, as well as, of course, game design books and stuff that I've mentioned in my earlier slides. So go back and check those if you're looking for some good areas to learn. Um, I very heavily believe that playtesting through analytics is the more responsible way to go. It's more difficult, and I'm not saying you can't gain anything from an in-person playtest, but in-person playtests are so much more at risk to be skewed by cognitive biases. Also, doing them on a scale which avoids the law of large numbers. Like, here's the thing: law of large numbers exists for in-person playtests as well. We just can't imagine it because there are just so many people who need to play the game. When someone does an in-person playtest, you really have to assume there's a massive error rate when anyone's doing an in-person playtest. And now, if something's horribly wrong enough to like that it extends past that error margin, then yeah, an in-person playtest can help. But in general, like, I'd say data-driven mass audience type refinement of your game is the much more effective tool. And I mean, heck, I live in Indiana. I don't have any in-person people I can really test with. I'm like, there's not really. I don't. You guys may not believe this, but I don't have a. I don't have, as a 23-year-old man, I don't hang out with a bunch of 10-year-olds anymore and can't just show them my game like I could in elementary school. Like, it's there's you kind of have to do data driven at some point as an indie dev. But yeah, I mean, also a Discord, holding on to your fans to be testers, that can be helpful in its own sense, just to get some of those more qualitative things. So if you have the resources to do a bunch of in-person playtests, I wouldn't necessarily say no, but just make sure you follow a procedure. And honestly, if you have those resources, hire someone. Hire someone who's a verified expert in the field. Because, yeah. Anyway, data-driven stuff is good. Yeah, you're going to trick yourself too many times if you just rely on your own experience. Is it better to add more systems to the gameplay loop or add more action states on existing systems? So there's a balance, I think, to be had. Everyone here should research the field of behavioral economics. Look at the book recommendations I made earlier. There's a book called Predictably Irrational. Predictably Irrational is a very influential book in my life. It taught me so much about how our brains trick ourselves in very predictable ways. And it shows the limits our minds have. And when I say our, I mean I'll also include our players, because a player can only recognize so much, can only make so much sense of something you've provided them. And behavioral economics, as well as the cognitive biases, can shape that a ton. In fact, look at my player motivation talk. We talked a lot about we talked a great deal about what's it called, cognitive biases in that one. And so with that in mind, to answer your question, players will get overwhelmed if you have too many states. In fact, a rule of thumb, never put more than six details, 6 or 7 details. Anything which a person has to consider in one moment should not have more than 6 or 7 things they need to consider, because if it's more than that, they won't remember. They'll lose out. And if you have a complicated system, that means you have to simplify stuff into little chunks. Like that's why health is often referred to as just a single number between 1 and 0, because we don't want you to remember what each limb health is. You don't need to know the player heart rate for all that stuff. You can simplify that down to a single metric which they can use to make decisions. Like, do I have enough health? Yeah, I do. Okay. And then you can add secondary layers where they can dig deeper into a certain area to get more information. But at one point, a player should not be shown more than 6 or 7 things they need to remember, because it'll overwhelm them. So in terms of adding more systems versus adding more action states, it really is just a balancing act. If you already have 7 systems, which the player is trying to remember, which, by the way, is both impressive and also probably getting to a point where you're going to make some chaos, because it can be a little bit difficult to track once you get around that level. But once you have 7 systems, well then, if the player has to consider all 7 systems, they will barely have enough room to consider any individual state from a system. That'll have to be if you have 7 systems, they will have to consider only like one variable per system, because otherwise they're not going to be able to focus. And yeah, so definitely make that balancing act, because it really is just about like what can you be using your players' focus on. You have a limited player focus budget. Where does it go? And as a designer, you're going to have to find a way to solve that for each problem, because if they're overwhelmed, they're overwhelmed. And especially with kids, an overwhelmed kid will quit a lot faster than an overwhelmed adult, especially for a free-to-play game. Let's see. That's why onboarding is so important. If you overwhelm a player in onboarding, they will never come back. So that player branching stuff, that player tracking stuff I mentioned earlier, is very useful. Let's see. How would you gauge what's hot and trendy, and how would you cater against specific audiences without making very major changes? So I think in terms of what's trendy, I don't know. You could probably do some. I think for trends, there's various analytics. Like I know R-Track has some trend stuff. I know, but really the only audience metrics you really need to worry about are just demographics, or like even just looking at who's playing what. Like just look at the games page. What is there currently on the games page? It's a bunch of casual, social, often role-playing games, and there are a lot of fighting games as well. Like those are the things that that's the audience. Beyond that, know that devices typically can't handle more than 400 megabytes of memory on average. Most players are on mobile these days, so you got to make your game touch focused at the start, like touch screens. So, but those are really the only audience constraints you need to consider. Beyond that, your player, the core audience you should think about is just use that player motivation thing I showed earlier. Your core audience, define it by player motivation. Don't define it by like people who like biking or something. Like, don't define, because that's just a layer above it. The core of it is, why do they enjoy it? They enjoy it because either A, it makes them happy to achieve stuff, B, it makes them happy to feel like they survived something, or C, it makes them happy to just do things with other people, whether they be NPCs or real people. In fact, watch my entire player motivation talk. There are so many useful things that you can do with just core player motivation. And I'd say chasing fads isn't going to get you too far, because it can be difficult to determine how much of an audience is. And honestly, with look at if you have an opportunity to make something like, let's say let's choose a fad or an audience, like skateboarding games or something. Skateboarding games, if you focus it too much on a specific person who likes skateboarding, you could end up with a situation where your audience is only people who like skateboarding, when in reality the reason it's fun is for the same reason skateboarding's fun, because it is that sort of flow state you get into, that sort of like, oh yeah, I just hit that sick jump. It's the mix of like sort of survival of like, I'm going so fast, and the achievement of like, oh yeah, I did that cool thing. And so those core motivations have a much wider audience. So by focusing on a single fad audience, that fad is going to be smaller than the actual motivations that everyone in humanity hypothetically has. And so, focus on motivations first. And in terms of making many changes, cater you can't move, unless you're going to remake a game, you cannot move an audience too far. Like, you cannot move a core game too far in any direction. It can take a lot of work to reorient your game around a certain motivation. So more just figure out, where is your current motivation at? Like, what are you currently rewarding? And then move it a little bit more towards in a direction. Like, see if you can better cater to that motivation. Figure out where you currently are, and then just amp that up. Don't try to move to something else. If you want to do something else, make a new game. Honestly, it's yeah. Let's see. Why do you think Superhero Life 3 didn't do as well as Superhero Life 2? What advice can you provide from your development producers for Superhero Life? Okay, so Superhero Life 3 and Superhero Life 2, it's because I misunderstood what the core motivation for Superhero Life 2 was. Superhero Life 2 is corely motivated by the sort of escapist fantasy and being able to, the social motivations of being able to create something that's your own and then sort of flex it on people like, oh, look, I'm this cool character. I thought it was about fighting because superhero fights are so cool. It was not. Sure, some fighting happens, but that's really not the reason people were playing the game. People were playing it to role-play as superheroes. And so I built Superhero Life 3 as more of a role-playing game. I lessened up on the role-play mechanic. Sorry, I built Superhero Life 3 as a combat game. I lessened up on the role-play mechanics, and Superhero Life 3 was more of a fighting thing. And I realized, for one, I'm not that good at making fighting mechanics. So I was making a lesser experience, for one, and two, the people who enjoyed Superhero Life 2, they would no longer enjoy Superhero Life 3. Not at least not as much. And there were still some people who do like Superhero Life 3 more because it hit a different motivation a little bit. And that's the thing. I made a new game from scratch that hit a different motivation, and I failed to recognize. But the thing is, I thought it was about the same motivation. I thought maybe I think at the time maybe I was thinking I would bring in more of like a jailbreak crowd or like bring in more of the action-oriented people and grow my audience. But growing your audience at the through sacrificing your old audience is a dangerous move. I'm not sure I'd recommend it to anyone. So yeah, figure out who your core audience is, what that core player motivation is, and let that inform your future decisions. Because at the end of the day, every bit of this presentation about engagement loops, about core loops, they all rely upon the emotional sensations you get from playing the game, and that is player motivation. What motivates someone to spend their time looking at a digital display? Because digital is not reality. Most of the time, it's not reality, and you have to basically trick them into thinking it matters. And don't get me wrong, I've met many great people on the platform, and I have some great memories from it, from many different games. But at the end of the day, they were not real. These were digital constructions of reality. And so a great game can get you to forget that and get you to bond with it as though it is part of reality, an extension of it. And so yeah, that definitely just focus on that player motivation. Focus on how you can get players to feel that way about your game. And so people, and in terms of, yeah, so that's my advice for all of that. Are Tycoon games still profitable? I don't think the core motivations for why Tycoon games are fun are gone. I think those motivations still exist, so the audience can still be acquired, but thing is, it's just not that efficient. It's like, is a horse-driven carriage still profitable? Like, yeah, there are instances where you could make it work, and you could probably sell it for a certain amount of money. But like in terms of utility, in terms of getting the job done, there are just so many better options now. I don't know why you would limit yourself to it. Like you could do better. And if you have a Tycoon game, don't worry, you can improve it. It's just the copy and paste template Tycoon game is one that, while is very resilient in its own sense with a fairly solid progression loop, it's one that also hasn't grown too much, and it can be done better. And in fact, simulators, I'd argue, most of those simulator games are sort of reflection of it. They sort of realized, okay, people don't care about bases as much in a Tycoon game, so building up a base isn't going to help as much. Build up the character and allow that character to move around the game, and it's more compelling. Have them build up assistance. Have them build up things in a more engaging way that allows them to change the status quo more often than, say, a Tycoon where you just build up a building. So simulators, in my opinion, are just a Tycoon game that's a little bit more evolved and a little bit does a better job at reaching those player motivation goals. And so yeah, you can make a game with the same motivations of a Tycoon game, and you can have a progression loop in it that you can have a game driven by mostly a progression loop still. But you're gonna have to be smarter than that. You're gonna have to build upon that, because there are so many Tycoon games currently that just do the bare minimum. Of course they aren't. None of them are standing out. So yeah, no, I think it's up to the designer to take that game and just sort of build off of it. I know back in old Roblox, Water Tycoon was actually a game that did this because it had a lot more. It had a lot more like moving parts and mechanics that you could add to it. Like you could have the player you deliver water and salt to your water plant to help boost it in certain ways, and you could invest money and get interest to save it. And there are all these little cool systems that they added on top of a fairly basic Tycoon that made it better. And yeah, so you can do those things. Just give the player more mechanics. Use the systems thinking we were talking about earlier to give the player more to do, and more that supports that goal. Yellow and red. So actually, yellow and red are great numbers. Great numbers, great colors. They're great colors. What matters to me more is just that if you look at a color wheel, the colors that are on opposite ends of the spectrum will pop the most from each other. So definitely you notice a lot of blue and orange, I think, is where I see it the most, especially in posters and stuff. Blue and orange, those would do great. Red and green, purple and yellow, those things pop like crazy. Yeah, but definitely I'm sure there are many good articles on just like how to make colors pop in UI design. Yeah, yeah. And then you've noticed my whiteboard. You probably don't need a whiteboard, but this has helped me more often than not in terms of designing systems and stuff. Because using tools like Miro, which is what I use for so many of these diagrams, those are useful, especially for stuff that you're going to be working with for a long time. But for just sketching down ideas, whiteboard, very helpful. Roblox has them in like every other room. I actually went to another office recently where they had literal the paint on the walls was made of whiteboard material, so you just write on the walls and erase it, and it was great. Though I was very nervous when I was writing on it for the first time. Yeah, so someone's pointed out that sequels on Roblox end up doing less mechanics, but they add a lot of graphics in Roblox. I actually agree. Yeah, features care more. The core design and gameplay matters more than necessarily the polish, the nicer graphics. There are a few instances with like where if a certain mechanic is core to the game, such as say a driving mechanic, polishing that is actually reliant on the core loop, especially if like it's immersion. You want to feel you have to replicate a certain sensation. But in general, like if it like the secondary mechanics especially, or just the graphics, very few games need graphics to this well. If you can look at games from like the 90s or early 2000s, you could do a fun role playing game with horrible graphics. That's just the case. You don't. Also, look at Roblox. The best graphics on Roblox are like the okayest graphics in Unity. Roblox is not known to be a graphics powerhouse, and that's okay. It's very flexible and has its own benefits. But graphics, they're expensive, and frankly, I think they have diminishing returns. I think most people, especially the kids on the site, will not appreciate it. And frankly, most time when you boost graphics, you can actually hurt performance, and people will exit a lot more because the game's laggy than they'll stay because the game's pretty. If you don't believe me, look at showcases. And also look at like the low poly aesthetic, which so many of the front page games have. Very rarely do you see a truly breathtaking front page game in terms of just visual graphics. Yeah, so I definitely, I wouldn't necessarily say never have nice things that look good in your game, but like use them wisely, and use them knowing the kind of constraints and costs that it imposes on your game. What are the ways to make linear progression games such as a simulator tycoon is more systemic or have systemic features? Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I'd say look at progression games in general, because not all games are linear progression games. Look at the success area. Look at games like Factorio or survival crafting games. Games where you do have a set goal and you reach certain accomplishments, such as like crafting a new item. Those are fairly linear. Like if you look at Minecraft, there's literally an end to Minecraft, but the path you can take to it is so different, and also you don't have to go to it. Like the point is, by making it open-ended, and systemic, it has to be systemic for it to be open-ended in a sense. You have to create mechanics which allow players to do things in much more interesting ways. So yeah, I'd look at survival crafting games and just crafting games in general. Factorio is obviously a great example, but don't get too intimidated by it. It's obviously the top of its tier. It has a very specific audience in mind. And honestly, I wouldn't even say replicate it for Roblox. It's for an older audience for sure. But let's see. What would be a lower tier? What would be a more accessible level? Minecraft. Minecraft is a great example of a game with some systems like that. I guess on Roblox, Booga Booga is a great example of a game which really does use the systems that it has to build up this sort of progression system. Like you build up a fortress and all this cool stuff. But yeah, like progression loops are found in most games, honestly. To devote a game fully to progressing towards a certain goal is a little bit more rare, just because it kind of does constrain you. But you can certainly do it. Just give the player ways to get, even if the player can't lose, have it so that the player can change how fast they win. Like have it so that player choice matters, so that players can change the route which they're taking to get to the end. And I think that's how you make a great game. in general, honestly. Not even just for these kind of games. Let's see. If anyone uses PlayFab, yeah, it's certainly a more difficult tool to get to know, which is in some ways why I prefer making my own stuff, just because I understand it better. But yeah, Roblox needs more updates. I don't know. I think Roblox, honestly, this one I wish Roblox would start updating the actual site more, because it kind of stuck in 2008 Facebook levels. I think that Roblox should start embracing a little bit more of a Twitter type thing, where it's a little more casual, a little bit more moment to moment, more almost like I'd love to see a fully 3D Roblox interface where it's like you're just walking around a 3D world where you can bump into your friends and you can interact with certain games and you can do all this stuff, this ultimate hub. But obviously that's far off in the future if it ever happens. I just think that the Roblox site is probably what's the most outdated thing on the platform currently. Like, look at 2008 Roblox versus today. Like, they've changed some of the textures, but by and large, the site design has stayed mostly the same. And I don't think any design makes sense after a decade. You have to keep iterating on stuff. Stuff never stays the same, especially not for technology. Especially not for a dynamic audience. What the audience today needs is much different than what the audience back then needed. Yeah, anyway, but obviously, since most people don't spend the entirety of their time on the site and spend it in games, it's probably not the hugest priority, but I think it is what is currently lacking the most in terms of like technical competence towards the goal. Not sure if it's not sure if it's really the most important, but like I think it is the most far behind. Dragon Tycoon? Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Thank you. What tycoon is where instead of preset buildings you buy, you're able to place your own buildings. So that's a risky one because creativity, house building games like Welcome to Bloxburg are in their own sense, like all strategy games are creative in a sense. Like you just need to figure out, what am I focusing the player's creativity on? Are they focusing on strategy in terms of where to place a wall in a room and like what color to make it, or are they focusing on strategy of where to put the house? Like what decisions matter towards the player motivation? And typically for games that rely more on like aesthetic customization, like character customization or house customization, like designing and decorating a room, those are more social games, and that's fine. They can do very well. As I said, Welcome to Bloxburg, tens of millions of dollars. like very well. It does very well. But you need to design your game with that end goal in mind. If you're making a more asocial, like survival crafting type game, or a tycoon, which tycoons aren't necessarily super social. They have a little bit of social features in the sense that like you can flex your progress on other people, but they really aren't meant to be like showing off your unique flair in life. Having customization through, say, making a preset like where you have to make your own buildings, that's showing off your own personal taste a little bit more, your own personal flair. And I guess it's up to you. Is this a motivation which you are designing the game around, and does this, because that's the effect I think it'll have. Just you don't want to you want to make sure that every design decision you make returns to that player motivation. There's in one of the Tony Hawk games, they had this single motto which I think they like wrote on the wall. It says, "Does it shred?" Because that was the motivation essentially. That's sort of an abstraction of their motivation of like this immersion and like thrill and success combo. So does it shred? It was kind of like a shorthand for their player motivation, and they were able to use that every time they had a design question. They ask, "Does it shred?" And if it did, then they went that route, and they got the maximum shred for their game. Yeah, and it's just so figure out what is the purpose of your game. A simple tycoon game is mostly success oriented. In which case, I would not say that customization matters so much as strategy. If you want them to customize stuff aesthetically, then that's more social. If their customization actually gives them a strategic advantage, then I'd say go for it. But like you have to make sure it returns to that main focus. Let's see. In terms of group funds, I don't know. I don't care too much about the problem. To me, group funds, forcing people to wait isn't exactly the worst thing ever. Like you're still you're not losing any money, and there are some people who are getting stuff stolen. Yeah, it makes people wait 2 weeks, but oh, boo hoo. I don't know. It has inconvenienced me on a few occasions, but most of the time, the people who I'm working with long term have been in my group for longer than 2 weeks. So it's almost like a responsibility thing. Like you should, if you need group funds to pay someone, it's a decision which requires at least 2 weeks of thinking about. Like I don't mind it too much. I think that yeah, did they increase the tax? Yeah, increasing the tax would be bad. I don't like the idea of increasing the tax. Um, I don't think I'd heard about that. Are you sure that's the case? Because as far as I can tell, Roblox transfers from groups as of like a day or two ago do not impose any tax on it. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. I just think that if it's just about making people wait, I'm sure it's annoying. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. I don't know. I mean, obviously, maybe there's an idea out there which accomplishes this without inconveniencing people, in which case that's great. I'm sure that you could have some other solutions, such as certain authentication techniques, having the money hang in limbo for a certain amount of time, like actually being able to send it immediately, but then just sort of like having it trickle out over time. But it's just, I don't know. For now, I think just how many people now are no longer complaining that, oh no, someone stole our group funds. Well, just being able to have that reduce, I'm sure is very meaningful to the actual moderation team, because you could tell they're stretched out. Like there's a lot of people they got to handle, and anything they do that makes that easier, I'm sure, is very helpful. What causes games to diminish player count over time? Retention mostly. That's a retention problem where people, the game has a natural. Every game has a natural discovery rate. You can use yours. You can calculate yours by determining what percent of players are returning players, and then what percent of players are new players. Whatever your natural discovery rate is, it's typically reliant. It's a percentage of whatever your total daily active users is. So if you start losing retention, if you start losing players from retention rate, you'll start losing players from discovery rate, and so it'll just become this vicious cycle where your numbers will just keep dropping. And so with these numbers, I think it's very important to, let's see, I think with these numbers, avoiding all of that, and what was it? Oh yeah, so with these numbers, it just boosts your retention rate. If people stop coming back to your game, which is certainly possible, I mean, like, that's a problem. There are things you need to add more long-term goals, essentially, in that case. Or you need to add more variability in your gameplay. People need a reason to come back, whether that be because they'll have a new, fun play experience, which I think systemic gameplay can be very helpful with, or because they didn't have anything they wanted to do after, in which case, then more long-term goals. So yeah, analytics will help you figure out exactly what is causing people to not come back. Correlate that stuff for sure. So long-term, thank you all for showing up. Those who stop popping out right now, I understand. I'm probably going to be ending in the next few minutes. Maybe after just this question. How would you recommend long-term retention of players? Mix of gameplay which doesn't get stale, and obviously long-term goals. Like with the engagement loop I showed you, if you have a goal for the player at every time increment, they'll have a reason to come back if the core gameplay is fun. So if you got the core gameplay working and it's fun to do again and again and again, because the core gameplay is what they're going to be doing all the time. If it was miserable to swing a sword or mine a brick in Minecraft, nobody would play it. Like, you could mess up that mechanic really easily. Like, imagine having bricks take 3 times as long to the blocks to break, and placing it took 20 seconds every time. That would ruin the core loop, and no one would play the game. So, like, be sure to optimize your game's core loop, and then so that people have a reason to come back and stick around long enough. So that core engagement, and then beyond that, just a long-term goal, so they don't ever sit back and think, well, now what? They should always know what their direction is, whether it be intrinsic, set by the player themselves in like a sandbox game, or extrinsic, set by you. Ideally, a good designer will be able to guess the intrinsic goals, or at least gather them through talking with the players, and then design a game that caters to that as well. Like, a lot of Minecraft isn't getting to the end. A lot of it's just building cool stuff. So they added new stuff. They added new elements to the game which focus on just allowing you to make cooler things, not even things that help you to the end, just allow you to decorate and make more cool stuff. But yeah, so I think there's it's almost 2 a.m. Yeah, I think I'm going to head out soon. Yeah, but thank y'all. Let's see, follow me on Twitter. I'll probably read. It's probably going to be the last in-person event I do for a bit, but I'll definitely write some Medium articles about smaller topics that I can refine a bit more and sort of get to a more accessible state. But yeah, feel free to, if you're on the dev forum, feel free to ask me questions. You can DM me if you have a short question. I'd be happy to give an answer to. For like long-term like guidance, that's more of a partnership thing. But hey, thank you all for stopping by. All right, and